Pakistan's response, and it remains to be seen whether Pakistan, of course, accepts things. It doesn't sound like they will. But how did India frame their interpretation of what they did? Did they, if Pakistan accepted it, did they say, this is it, we've now kind of ended our response to that terrorist attack last month? Or did they also hint themselves that there could be more to come?
Well, at the moment, it just seems that the Indian side has said that these were attacks against terror organizations, the launch pads and terrorist hideouts and logistics of terror organizations, and they have not hit any civilian or military installations, and making very clear that these attacks are not against the establishment in Pakistan. But now it all depends on how much escalation or how Pakistan retaliates. We've seen in the past that there has been a lot of tensions that had escalated to a point where the world was scared of a nuclear flashpoint, because these are two nuclear-armed neighbors with decades of hostility. Several wars have been fought over Kashmir, and skirmishes have taken place. There have been, in 2019, there was a dogfight in Pakistani airspace where an Indian jet was shot down, its pilot was captured, and after a lot of negotiations and tensions, he was returned. Now, earlier on, we've seen India telling Pakistan or bringing forward its case with dossiers of information and evidence saying that terror organizations in Pakistan have been responsible for a number of attacks not only in Kashmir but the rest of the country. One major one was the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, where 10 Pakistani men belonging to the Lashkar-e-Toiba, a terror organization, proscribed terror organization by the United States, Britain, a number of Western countries, Israel, India as well. And they created mayhem and chaos over the last 4 days in Kashmir in November 2008, killing 166 people. India said it provided dossiers of information evidence, and nothing has been done. Similarly, in 2016, another attack on an Air Force base camp in Uri, which is on the Indian side, close to the border. There was an attack there. A number of Indian Air Force personnel were killed and their families. India invited and brought in investigators from Pakistan who looked around and looked around the crime scene, investigated, but nothing happened after that. In 2019, a convoy of Indian paramilitary was hit by a suicide bomber, again linked to the Lashkar-e-Toiba, killing 40 paramilitary soldiers. And that after about 12 days, India conducted surgical strikes on these terror organizations across the border in Balakot, which is about 40 kilometers north of Muzaffarabad. And thereon there's been tensions escalating since then. And now we've seen this attack on the 22nd of April, where 26 tourists were killed, and now the retaliation.
Neville, great stuff. Stay close for us. Neville Lazarus there for us in New Delhi. Well, Mari's here, of course, on set with us as well. Mari, what have we heard from the Foreign Office and from the government here?
So far, we've had a statement from the Foreign Office. Now, you're going to be speaking, Jonathan Reynolds, in the next hour, and that will give us an even more up-to-date response from the UK government. But let me read you what so far we've had from the Foreign Office. So they've said, on the night of the 6th of May, Pakistan's civil aviation indicated that it was closing Pakistan airspace for at least 48 hours. There are reports of flights being diverted. British nationals should contact their airline for up-to-date information. We are continuing to monitor the situation closely. British nationals should stay up to date with our travel advice and follow the advice of local authorities. And for anyone who might be in the region or family in the region, they can find that travel advice on the government website as well. That is update at the moment. And then if we go across the Atlantic, Donald Trump has been speaking overnight about these events unfolding as well. And he said, I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time. I just hope it ends very quickly. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also said he echoes Donald Trump's words and hopes the fighting ends quickly. And then thirdly, we've had a statement from a spokesman for the UN chief. So they've said the Secretary General is very concerned about the Indian military operations across the line of control and international border. He calls for maximum military restraint from both countries. The world cannot afford a military confrontation between Pakistan and India. And that really just gives us a flavour of the gravity of what we are seeing right now. And Neville was outlining really well, really what this means and the fact that two nuclear powers are at the moment at loggerheads.
Mark, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. As mentioned, we'll be joined by the government at 7:15 in about an hour. For now, let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch. Cordelia, I guess the first question is what I put to Neville, first of all, but just put in context for us the scale of the military exchanges that we're hearing about over the last 12 hours relative to history broadly, relative to 2019 specifically.
Yes, this is undoubtedly a major inflection point. It is a moment for intense consideration, I think, and that is because of the historical context, what it marks compared to what we've seen before. India last night struck deeper than it has since 1971. These are two nations that have been at war 3 times. This represents something far more significant than what we saw in 2019 also. But we are hearing a lot of speculation, discussion around these two nations being on the brink of war, and I think it is important not to sort of trade in hyperbole at this moment. As India has said, it is a restrained, a precise military action that is aimed, it claims, at terrorist infrastructure. That is something that Pakistan refutes. But these were attacks that to some extent were hotly anticipated. I think the intensity to which India carried them out has come as a surprise. And we have heard in the last few hours from the Pakistani representative to the UN who said this is a blatant act of aggression. Pakistan reserves that right to respond. It's important to say that the Pakistan National Security Committee is just about to meet. I've been told that we will hear from Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif after that in an address to the nation. As Mari was describing there, we've heard this international response, lots of people urging maximum restraint, the UN from the UAE as well.
Cordy, forgive me for interrupting. We're going to go back to the press conference with the Indian Foreign Secretary, which is now in English.
Earlier too, in December 2023, India had informed the monitoring team about Lashkar and Jaish-e-Mohammed operating through small terror groups such as the TRF. Pakistan's pressure to remove references to TRF in the April 25 UN Security Council press statement is notable in this regard. Investigations into the Pahalgam terror attack have brought out the communication notes of terrorists in and to Pakistan. The claims made by the Resistance Front and their reposting by known social media handles of the Lashkar-e-Taiba speak for themselves. Identification of the attackers based on eyewitness accounts as well as other information available to law enforcement agencies has also progressed. Our intelligence has developed an accurate picture of the planners and backers of this team. The features of this attack also tie in with Pakistan's long track record of perpetrating cross-border terrorism in India, which is well documented and beyond question. Pakistan also has a well-deserved reputation as a haven for terrorists from around the world, with internationally proscribed terrorists enjoying impunity there. In addition, Pakistan has been known to willfully mislead the world and international forums, such as the Financial Action Task Force, on this issue. The Sajid Mir case, in which this terrorist was declared dead, and then, in response to international pressure, brought back to life, found alive and arrested, is the most glaring example. The latest attack in Pahalgam has understandably generated deep anger in Jammu and Kashmir and in other parts of India. Following the attacks, the government of India naturally responded with a set of initial measures relating to our engagement with Pakistan. You're all aware of the decisions that were announced on the 23rd of April. However, it was deemed essential that the perpetrators and planners of the 22nd April attack be brought to justice. Despite a fortnight having passed since the attacks, there has been no demonstrable step from Pakistan to take action against the terrorist infrastructure on its territory or on territory under its control. Instead, all it has indulged in are denials and allegations. Our intelligence monitoring of Pakistan-based terrorist modules indicated that further attacks against India were impending. There was thus a compulsion both to deter and to preempt. Earlier this morning, as you would be aware, India exercised its right to respond and preempt as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. You would also recall that the Security Council on 25th April 2025 had issued a press statement on the Pahalgam terror attack, underlining, and I quote, the need to hold perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of this reprehensible act of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice, unquote. India's latest actions should be seen in this context. Joining me for this briefing on our actions earlier this morning are Colonel Sophia Qureshi and Wing Commander Vyomika Singh. I will request them to share some details regarding Operation Sindoor with all of you.
सुप्रभात देवियों और सज्जनों मैं कर्नल सोफिया कुरैशी और मेरे साथ
Let's bring back in Cordy, who's still listening in with us. We'll continue to monitor that. We'll rejoin the press conference as and when it turns back to English. Cordy, there was a lot there from Indian Foreign Secretary Bikram Mesri, but perhaps the line that jumped out to me most of all is he said that further attacks on India were impending and they took this action to deter and preempt. He went on to say that the actions they took overnight were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate and responsible. I guess it remains to be seen the extent to which the international community, as and when they get more information, accept and agree with that. But it seems so far that the Pakistan authorities don't agree with that.
Yes, I mean, they strongly refute it. That is what we have heard ever since the attack in Kashmir that was considered in part so incendiary because it took place in a touristy area and it was civilians that were killed. Pakistan has from that very moment denied any involvement. Now, we have heard from India, well, you may have heard just there in that press briefing, Lashkar-e-Taiba, that is a group that is an offshoot of the resistance front in Kashmir that the Indians are accusing of having been involved in the specific attack within Kashmir. Now, I too was struck by that suggestion that...
OK. Cordy, thanks so much for that. Forgive me for interrupting once again. The press conference has gone back to English, so I think this is Colonel Sophia Qureshi will confirm that for you. No, it's the Air Force commander whose name we'll get for you in a moment.
On the screen. They are distributed from Savai Nala in the north, counting to approximately 21, ending at Bhagalpur to the south.
इन लक्ष्यों का चयन विश्वसनीय इंटेलिजेंस सूचनाओं के आधार पर हुआ ताकि आतंक गतिविधियों की रीढ़ तोड़ी जा सके और यह खास ध्यान दिया गया कि निर्दोष नागरिकों और सिविलियन इंस्टॉलेशन को नुकसान न पहुंचे।
The selection of these targets for Operation Sindoor was based on credible intelligence inputs and role of these facilities in perpetrating the terror activities. The locations were so selected to avoid damage to civilian infrastructures and loss of any civilian lives. This was done with due diligence, and the camps selected for targeting and their engagement will now be shown to you one by one.
POJK के टारगेट्स मैं आपको बताना चाहूँगी। सबसे पहले सवाई नाला कैंप मुजफ्फराबाद, जो कि POJK के लाइन ऑफ कंट्रोल से 30 किलोमीटर दूर है। यह एक लश्कर तौयबा का ट्रेनिंग सेंटर था। 20 अक्टूबर 2024 सोनमर्ग।
So we're going to continue to monitor that. That's an ongoing press conference between Colonel Safir Qureshi and Wing Commander Yomika Singh. Over the last 5 minutes or so, a couple of the kind of key talking points that have come across have been that the operation lasted about half an hour, 12 or so hours ago, of course. They said that terrorist camps were completely destroyed in the attacks and that this involved recruitment centres, launch pads, indoctrination centres and centres that were targeted and they were chosen based on intelligence that they had gathered. Cordy, complete the thought. We interrupted you a moment ago.
I think what we're hearing from India there, in short, is that this was, in their view, a justified, limited, targeted strike which was aimed at, as they claim, terrorist infrastructure. That is not what Pakistan believes. And in fact, we have just heard from Pakistan's army spokesman who says they will respond at a time, place, and means of our own choice. So I think we can not only expect more muscular language from Pakistan, but action too. We have two nations with strong nationalist impulses that will want to be able to show they've acted decisively and to claim victory. Now, for the international community, this is a tense, worrying moment. You have a United States that has distractions elsewhere. Previously, the international community has waded in this decades-long conflict between India and Pakistan. I think we can't overstate the importance of the domestic audience in both countries as a factor in just how far they are willing to go. I think Pakistan's response to this will be inevitable, just as much as India's strikes overnight were in the wake of the Kashmir attack. The discussion, though, of two nations on the brink of war feels perhaps premature, but certainly there is, of course, scope for miscalculation here, these being two nuclear-armed nations, but they are also nations with a lot to lose. I think there will be some focus in Pakistan on the head of the army there, rather than perhaps the Prime Minister, because the military, of course, is all-powerful in Pakistan, and he is someone that is very focused on defending national pride. They have seen civilians killed in this attack, and they said it is within their right to respond to this blatant act of aggression. But I think it's important too to know that there's a lot of back-channeling going on diplomatically to try and talk these two countries back from the precipice. And we will have to see in the coming hours and days what other inflection points we might see. Just one more point to note, Wilf, is that the airspace has been closed over Pakistan. As I understand it, the airspace around Lahore and Karachi is due potentially to be open soon, which might be some indication of a reduced anxiety there, but nothing guaranteed at this moment. It is a feverish point with all eyes on India and Pakistan.
Cordy, thanks so much for now. Do stay close for us. But next up, we want to bring in for further reaction from Karachi. Dr. Huma Bakwi, Professor of International Relations at the Millennium Institute of Technology and Entrepreneurship. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Bakwi. What is the reaction there in Karachi? We were just listening in to the press conference from the Indian side, including Foreign Secretary Bikram Mesri. He said that India's actions over the last 12 hours were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate and responsible. Is the view different in Karachi?
Very different. Essentially, this is what we heard in 2016, this is what we heard in 2019, and the claims were proven wrong over time. Same seems to be the situation right now. Pakistan has retaliated and responded to the missiles that hit Bahawalpur, Kotli, and Muridpur. And essentially, civilians were killed and were also injured, which included women and children. And now Pakistan has actually shot down around 4 or 5 of their planes, including a drone. And in Pakistan, the sentiment is that perhaps we've won the first round, where we've repulsed the unprovocative attack from India. And as far as Pakistan's terror sponsoring situation is concerned, from the day this started, we have asked for independent investigations. We've asked for visits. And the fact that there was a huge intelligence failure on the Indian side is not something just Pakistan is saying. It is India's own analyst, its own journalist, its own former military personnel who are saying that this was a huge failure on the part of the Modi government. And if this was to happen, why was this not captured on camera? Why was there nobody to prevent it? Why have they been unable to present tangible evidence about it to anyone? In Pakistan, the understanding is that Modi is doing it for 2 reasons. One is electoral gains and his sliding popularity, especially in Bihar, which are happening right now. And 2 is the Indus Water Treaty, which is not being talked about. The international community is convinced that all they have to do is prevent escalation on the line of control at one of the most dangerous borders on the face of Earth. But essentially, India initiated this war by putting the treaty into abeyance, because as per the treaty, this in itself is an act of war. Pakistan had exercised strategic restraint by just showcasing operational preparedness. But the reaction came after India attacked deep into Pakistan's cities, Bahawalpur, Muridke, Kotli. Civilians died.
Dr. Bakwi, stay with us, please, because I'm going to come back to you in just a moment. But because it's 1:30 the hour, I just want to recap the headlines as we know them this morning for those viewers that are just joining us. The international community is calling for calm after India fired missiles into Pakistani-controlled territory late last night. India says it carried out a precision strike on terrorist camps, but Pakistan's defense minister said all the targets hit were civilian places. Pakistan's Prime Minister called the Indian missile attack an act of war and vowed his country has every right to give a full and strong response. Dozens of people have been killed as Indian and Pakistani forces exchanged fire in disputed Kashmir. India's military says it mounted the attacks in response to the killing of 26 people in Indian-administered Kashmir by militants last month. India described the massacre as a terror attack. Pakistan denied any connection to the atrocity. We've been talking to Dr. Huma Bakwi, Professor of International Relations at the Millennium Institute of Technology and Entrepreneurship in Karachi, and want to bring her back in now. If we've still got her, have we still got Dr. Bakwi? She has. We've lost the connection to Dr. Bakwi. She is back. Apologies for the delay, but Dr. Bakwi is back with us in Karachi. Thanks so much for sticking around. I just wanted to pick up on something you said in your last answer, just initially, just purely on the state of play. It sounded like your interpretation was Pakistan had already responded to India's missiles attacks from 12 or so hours ago. And indeed, you felt that Pakistan had won this first exchange of fire. Does that mean you think that for now there will be some calm for at least a couple of days, or do you think there is more to come in the hours ahead?
The ball is in the Indian court. If India again initiates something, Pakistan will have to respond. We've only responded to the provocation by India, and that has been our stance consistently. If India imposes a war on us, Pakistan will respond and react. So we, as per our news, and we have credible evidence that it is correct, at least 4 Indian planes have been downed. India raised a white flag to prevent further action, and it has been quiet after that. If India initiates something again, Pakistan will respond again. But Pakistan so far has exercised strategic restraint. We are only responding to Indian misadventure. We are not initiating it.
Do you think that this will be the end of it, or do you fear there will be more?
I'd like to think this is going to be the end of it, and the international community should impress upon India to exercise restraint. And India was advised by its own defense advisors and its own chief not to go this way. However, India chose to do what it did, and I think it's largely because Modi is in a commitment trap, and he felt that he needed to do this to gain some semblance of credibility in front of his own people. Most in Pakistan think that it has backfired for him.
Dr. Bakwai, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it from Karachi there. We're going to now just listen back to a little bit more of the press conference that was held by Indian officials, including the Foreign Secretary Bikram Misri and an army leader and an Air Force leader, which was yo-yoing between in Indian and English. Here's a portion from moments ago that was in English.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining this briefing. As you are all aware, on April 22, 2025, Pakistani and Pakistan-trained terrorists belonging to the Lashkar-e-Taiba carried out a savage attack on Indian tourists at Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir in India. They murdered 26 people, including 1 national of Nepal, causing the largest number of civilian casualties in a terrorist attack in India since the 26 November 2008 attacks in Mumbai. The attack in Pahalgam was marked by extreme barbarity, with the victims mostly killed with headshots from close range and in front of their families. Family members were deliberately traumatized through the manner of the killing, accompanied by the exhortation that they should take back the message. The attack was clearly driven by the objective of undermining the normalcy returning to Jammu and Kashmir. In particular, it was designed to impact the mainstay of the economy, tourism, with a record 23 million tourists visiting the valley last year. The calculation, presumably, was that harming growth and development in the Union Territory would help keep it backward and create fertile ground for continued cross-border terrorism from Pakistan. The manner of the attack was also driven by an objective of provoking communal discord, both in Jammu and Kashmir and the rest of the nation. It is to the credit of the government and the people of India that these designs were foiled. A group calling itself the Resistance Front has claimed responsibility for the attack. This group is a front for the UN-proscribed Pakistani terrorist group Lashkar-e-Taiba. It is notable that India had given inputs about the TRF in the half-yearly report to the monitoring team of the UN's 1267 Sanctions Committee in May and November 2024, bringing out its role as a cover for Pakistan-based terrorist groups. Earlier too, in December 2023, India had informed the monitoring team about Lashkar and Jaish-e-Mohammed operating through small terror groups such as the TRF. Pakistan's pressure to remove references to TRF in the April 25 UN Security Council press statement is notable in this regard. Investigations into the Pahalgam terror attack have brought out the communication notes of terrorists in and to Pakistan. The claims made by the Resistance Front and their reposting by known social media handles of the Lashkar-e-Taiba speak for themselves. Identification of the attackers based...
We're going to come out of that press conference, which is, of course, from about 5 to 10 minutes ago with the Indian Foreign Secretary Bikram Mesri, and we're going to continue to keep you up to speed on any developments coming out from officials on either side. But for now, let's continue our discussion and bring in from Delhi Mujib Mashal, the South Asia Bureau Chief for the New York Times. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Give us your snapshot of where things stand in terms of the potential for ongoing tit-for-tat responses, or whether there is at least a pause for now.
Well, it's still quite a moving situation right now. Although the Indian government and the Indian armed forces have essentially claimed that they've achieved their objective, that they've struck, 9 locations in Pakistan. What has happened since then is a bit of a gray picture that we're trying to piece together. There have been reports of a couple aircraft being down on the Indian side of the border. Information on whose aircraft those are, how they were down, are very, very sketchy at this point. So that what those aircraft are, if they're Indian aircraft that are being down, could indicate what the next steps in this escalation could be. If Pakistan comes out and says that it struck back in the process of the Indian military action, it could get us to a place where this may have been the extent of the escalation. But at this point, it is hard to tell, because Pakistan had promised that whatever action India takes, they would respond in kind. And we just don't know what the extent of the Pakistani response so far has been.
Yeah, I guess one Pakistani official had suggested they downed 5 aircraft, which was clearly a message that had reached my prior guest, Dr. Huma Bakri, a professor of international relations in Karachi. Either way, from what we do know for certain and what you kind of can piece together there in Delhi, put into context the scale of the military action we've seen over the last 12 hours relative to the last decade or so between these two countries.
Well, it feels much larger than previous military action, not just in the number of sort of locations that India targeted, but also that it targeted a couple locations in Punjab, sort of a province in mainland Pakistan. There have been Indian, retaliatory fire in parts of sort of a disputed area of Kashmir or further away from sort of central Pakistan. But the fact that they've hit, in Punjab, that is an element of how big a response this is compared to, say, 2019 or 2016, when India, after previous terror attacks, India sort of went after locations in Pakistan. So just the number of locations that India has targeted, but also the fact that they've targeted inside Punjab. But then again, the context of this recent terror attack in India needs to be taken into factor, because this was a horrific attack. All those killed were civilians. They were killed in a very gruesome manner, where they were identified for their religion and targeted for that. So there was enormous pressure on the Indian government to respond in a way that was bigger than its previous responses to attacks on its soil.
I'm interested in your take that you'll know well, being at the New York Times, in what was done in 2019 by the US to try and ease the tensions. Of course, that was under Trump's first administration, and some suggest he and Mike Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State at the time, did a lot to diffuse tensions. What did they do? What are you expecting them to do this time?
Well, there's actually an account that Mike Pompeo wrote in his book, that he was woken up in the middle of the night when the escalation happened, and he had to call both the Indian side and the Pakistani side, because both sides were telling the Americans that we think the other side is moving their nuclear weapons. So the US sort of had to calm down both sides and say, listen, this is not going to go the nuclear direction. But the other factor in the 2019 escalation was that Pakistan had used an American supplied F-16 plane to down an Indian, plane that was Russian supplied. So the Indians were saying, Pakistanis have breached the agreement that they have with the U.S. that these weapons, these sort of planes, the F-16s, should not have been used against us. The U.S. had provided these F-16s only as for Pakistan to use, as counter-terror. So that created an awkward reality for the U.S. to get involved as well. And what the U.S. played a role in was because the pilot of that Indian aircraft that had been shot down was captured by the Pakistanis. And sort of the accounts that I've heard from diplomats is that the U.S. tried to make sure that pilot, it was a miracle that, he was alive and he had, landed safely after his aircraft went down. But the U.S. played a role in returning that pilot to India swiftly, and that helped sort of calm down the tensions a little bit.
Really interesting to get that added perspective. In terms of the timing, I maybe this is a sort of ridiculous thing to bring up, but I'm just interested if you've heard anything where you are about why India struck when it did. There's obviously some interest in this, given that just yesterday India was announcing a trade deal with the United Kingdom. Are they totally random and unrelated in terms of the timing?
I think, those are random and unrelated. But if we think back to 2019, India took about 12 days, I think, if I remember correctly, to strike back. This time it's been about 2 weeks. One main factor in India's calculation is that there were fumbles in its 2019 retaliation, which kind of exposed India's military and the weaknesses of its military. In the years since, they've poured a lot of money into, starting the modernization of its military. So this time around, and in those 5 years since, 6 years since, India almost went to war footing with China. So this time around, it had to be very careful in what targets it chooses and how it executes, its mission to make sure it doesn't further expose a military that had fumbled last time. Because this time it wasn't just Pakistan that was watching, it was also China, because China remains in a very tense relationship with India. So the timing of why India took so long probably has to do with making sure they were very confident of what mission they were carrying out and sort of the success of that to make sure they reduce the mistakes of a military that's been under scrutiny for a long time.
Just finally, you kind of alluded to it there, but what is the state of each of the two countries' military as things stand? I read that they've both been modernized. You just mentioned it since 2019. If you're able to put aside the nuclear weapons that both countries have, which of course we can't, but if you were, which side has more modern, ready-to-use, stronger military?
So a couple factors here. One is that India is a much larger military and a much larger economy, much larger economy. But India is sort of a democracy that needs to answer to other needs of it's the world's largest population. Pakistan, the military plays such a central role in running that country that sort of it spends an outsized amount on the military for a poor country. So it has spent a lot to sort of bring up its military capabilities. It is in the past 2 or 3 decades, in particular, Pakistan has added to its Air Force fleet, especially in aligning with sort of in the war against terror with the United States and using that opportunity to buy F-16s from the U.S. Even during the Cold War, it used that alliance sort of with the U.S. to bolster its military. So India has been buying a lot of new equipment from France, from the United States, from Israel. So in the past few years, we've seen a lot of further investment in modernizing its equipment. But what we've seen is a change of dynamics and alliances in the region. India's military used to be heavily dependent on Russian equipment. That we've seen have gone down almost by half in the past 4 or 5 years. Instead, we've seen an increase of India's purchases from the US, France and other Western allies. On the Pakistani side, which used to be heavily dependent on American equipment, we've seen in recent years that that has almost completely dried out. And about 80% of Pakistan's military purchases over the past few years have come from China. So a major factor in this escalation is to see how the regional dynamics and the alliances have been shifting dramatically in recent years compared to the historic patterns.
Mujib, fantastic to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us. Mujib Mashal, the South Asia Bureau Chief at the New York Times. Let's get a reminder of the response we've had from the political community here in the UK, but also elsewhere in the US. Mari's here with that. Mari, remind us what we heard from the government so far.
So we had a statement put out overnight from the Foreign Office, which said on the night of the 6th of May, Pakistan Civil Aviation indicated that it was closing Pakistan airspace for at least 48 hours. There are reports of flights being diverted. British nationals should contact their airline for up-to-date information. We are continuing to monitor the situation closely. British nationals should stay up-to-date with our travel advice and follow the advice of local authorities. And for anyone who is in the region or with family and friends in the region, that advice can be found on the government travel advice website. And then across the Atlantic, Donald Trump has been speaking about this as well. And we can have a little listen to a short clip of what he had to say about this ongoing conflict.
No, it's a shame. We just heard about it just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time. You know, they've been fighting for many, many decades and centuries, actually, if you really think about it. No, I just hope it ends very quickly.
So that was Donald Trump reacting live as that news was breaking during that press conference, excuse me. And then we've got Jonathan Reynolds on the programme that you'll be speaking to, the Business and Trade Secretary, in about 30 minutes. And we'll be able to get an up-to-date, kind of fresh response from the government as well.
I mean, ironically, that press conference he was holding there, President Trump, was the swearing-in ceremony of his peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, as well. So just couldn't really make it up in terms of the timing, but he was there responding as it was unfolding last night. Mari, thanks so much for that. Mentioning as well, we will be joined by Johnny Reynolds, the Business Secretary, who was in India just a few days ago. So it'd be great to get his perspective. Also great to get the perspective now of Zahir Shah Shirazi, who's a senior analyst at BOL News. He joins us from Peshawar in Pakistan. Very great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us, Zahir. We've been listening to various people sum up what has happened over the course of the last 12 hours. What is your interpretation?
Well, thank you very much. I think since last night we have seen and mostly reported and the things which are coming on the social media. Apparently, Indians have a strike and they have confirmed also officially. And 5-6 areas are targeted by the Indian attack, and mostly these are the mosques and the seminaries which are related to what they claim to Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, or Lashkar-e-Taiba. But apparently, as the Pakistani authorities are saying, mostly these were the civilian places which had been targeted. The death toll, obviously, as confirmed by the officials and the information we have from the ministry as well, more than 26 people have died in different incidents, especially in Kashmir, in Murid area, in Punjab. But this is for the first time we have seen, apart from the troubled Kashmir region and the disputed area, the Indians have struck inside across the international border in Pakistan. So it's quite a different kind of a thing. On the other hand, we are also having claims from the Pakistani authorities that they have shot down at least 3 to 5 aircraft. Apparently now the visuals and the photographs are surfacing from Kashmir and other parts of India that there are some fighter planes which had gone down. But we don't have any official confirmation till now from the Indian government that how many of those aircraft had been gunned down by the Pakistani forces as they have claimed. Along the LOC, we have spoken to some of the people there on the line of control in Kashmir and in the Pakistani area of the Kashmir, and they have confirmed There is a movement of people. They are evacuating to the safer places. A number of civilian houses have been hit. The casualty figure is likely to rise, but importantly, what we can say, the Indians making this incident in the Indian-held Kashmir have started this aggression, which the Pakistani authorities are saying perhaps it's an aggression. But how Pakistan had responded, it looked very clear that Pakistan has targeted only the military and the Indian Army's base camps. They are claiming they have destroyed one of their brigade headquarters in Kashmir. They have targeted the Srinagar airport. So obviously, Pakistan might be a smaller country militarily as well as far as the economic conditions are concerned, as earlier one of the panelists was saying. But apparently, Pakistan have given a more responsible stance. They had not, gone to the civilian side. They have not crossed over to the actual Indian territory. But again, the disputed area of Kashmir, it has been the prime target of the reply, which the Pakistani authorities are saying. And specifically, the military targets had been hit. So this is the kind of thing which might be giving an edge to Pakistan, flexing its muscle that it can strike anywhere. But obviously, the conflict between the two nuclearly armed states, it's obviously very dangerous for the region as well as for the entire piece of the Southeast Asian region.
Zahar Shah Shiratzi from BOL News, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. As we wrap up this hour of coverage, I want to bring back in Neville Lazarus, our India reporter from New Delhi. Neville, what are your final takeaways this hour? Of course, after we also heard that press conference from members of the foreign ministry and the military in India.
Well, this has been done in the past. India believes that it has provided enough evidence and information to Pakistan over the various series of attacks for decades, and nothing has really come of it. They have provided dossiers, especially after the Mumbai 2008 terror attacks of the gunmen. The 10 gunmen who came from Pakistan were part of the Lashkar-e-Toiba terror organization prescribed by the US, Britain, many Western countries, Israel, India, and nothing has been done over the past many attacks, and therefore they are pretty much frustrated. It just feels a lot of frustration out here and anger.
Just quickly, Neville, what is the latest you're hearing about the scale of the Pakistan response so far?
Well, there is damage in various parts of this side of the line of control. We have heard and seen some images of damages of the houses. There are reports of deaths also taking place over the because of the heavy firing and shelling across the line of the line of control, and this is escalating by the day.
Neville Lazarus will be right back out with you after a short break that we're going to take care on Sky News at breakfast. We'll be back with all of the day's top news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Good morning to you. It's 7 o'clock. Breaking news. India has launched airstrikes against Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. It's Wednesday, the 7th of May. Dozens of people killed as India and Pakistan exchange fire in disputed Kashmir. Pakistan claims to have shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and a drone. India says the world must show zero tolerance for terrorism, and it acted in response to an attack on tourists last month. The United Nations calls for maximum restraint from both countries. A very good morning to you. The international community is urging calm after India launched airstrikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Islamabad say 26 people were killed, including a child, calling the attacks cowardly and a blatant act of war to which they will respond. There have also been deaths on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir as a result of shelling between the two sides. This is what we know so far. India says it has struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir in what it said was a focused, measured and non-escalatory manner. But Pakistan's defence minister said all of the areas hit were civilian places, with the Pakistan Army chief saying at least 26 people have been killed and 46 injured. Pakistan says it has shot down 5 Indian jets and there have been shelling across the border. Police officials in Indian-controlled Kashmir say at least 10 people have been killed and 48 injured. The United Nations Secretary-General has called for maximum military restraint from both countries, saying the world cannot afford a confrontation between India and Pakistan. Neville Lazarus has this first report for us from the Indian capital, New Delhi.
It's what the world feared and Pakistan expected. Loud explosions filled the sky in the early hours of the morning in Pakistan's controlled territory of Kashmir. Pakistan claims civilians have been killed, including a child, and several injured, describing the attack as a blatant act of war. India says they hit terrorist infrastructure. Its defense ministry released a statement saying altogether 9 sites have been targeted. Our actions have been focused, measured and non-escalatory in nature. No Pakistani military facilities have been targeted. India has demonstrated considerable restraint in selection of targets and methods of execution. These steps come in the wake of the barbaric Pahalgam terrorist attack, in which 25 Indians and 1 Nepali citizen was murdered. We are living up to the commitments that those responsible for this attack will be held accountable. Pakistan Air Defences says they have downed Indian planes. Those claims have not been confirmed. There has been intense shelling and firing across the line of control.
Pakistan has a right to respond. Pakistan will respond. As I've said before, we had an apprehension that India will attack. Pakistan has never struck first, but we have the right to self-defense.
Kashmir is the crown over which the 2 nuclear-armed neighbors have fought several wars and are in a perpetual state of tension. These attacks can soon become a flashpoint that the world needs to be worried of its consequence.
Well, Neville will join us live in just a moment. The story, though, has been moving fast. Here are the areas that India says were targeted by the Indian armed forces in Pakistan and Pakistani-controlled Kashmir. The majority along the top of the map are in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. These are sites that, according to reports, are training grounds for banned terror groups. The target at the bottom is in Punjab in Pakistan, which is home to the headquarters of the terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed. According to reports, that compound has facilities for religious indoctrination and military-style training. Well, in the last hour, we've heard from India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. You would also recall that the Security Council on 25th April 2025 had issued a press statement on the Pahalgam terror attack, underlining, and I quote, the need to hold perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of this reprehensible act of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice.
Neville joins us now from New Delhi. Neville, is there a sense that things have paused this morning, this afternoon for you, or not yet?
Well, now I think it all depends on what retaliation comes from Pakistan. India has said that they have done whatever they wanted. They've hit terror launch pads, organizations that have logistical support and compounds where terrorists were hiding. Now, it all depends on Pakistan of what retaliation comes across the border. We've seen overnight there's been heavy shelling and firing across the border. On both sides, their lives have been lost. On India, they have said several people have been killed. A number of homes have been damaged and destroyed in the Kupwara region. And this firing has been continuous along the 740-kilometer border in Kashmir. Now, we have heard the similar sort of reports of damage and deaths across the border or because of the firing. But for the moment, it seems that India has done what it had to. It followed that pattern which happened in 2009 of retaliation and airstrikes on terror organizations. It has also dialed up all the diplomatic offensive, calling up the National Security Advisor out here, speaking to the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and briefing him on what has happened. They are speaking to various other international leaders. But for the moment, it seems India has completed what it had to. There's been the anger that was built up over all these days over that killing on the 22nd of April seems to have subsided, and people are sort of supporting the government in whatever it's done.
Neville, as always, thank you so much for that. Stay close for us. Meanwhile, let's bring in Maliha Lodi, a Pakistani diplomat and the country's former representative to the United Nations. Thank you so much for joining us, Maliha. We'll look backwards in just a moment, but if we could first look forwards, Neville there reporting that for now it seems like India's actions have been completed. Do you feel like Pakistan's response has been completed or far from it?
Well, I think our country's National Security Committee is in session right now as I speak. They will decide the future course of action. But for now, there is obviously anger in Pakistan because civilians have been killed in the Indian aggression. They initiated this violence, and several civilians have lost their lives. So there is a lot of anger in Pakistan. But also, Pakistani authorities have confirmed that 5 Indian aircraft were downed, and some of these were jets. So therefore, Pakistan is ready for any eventuality. But I think we are going to see more international interventions to prevent the situation from further escalating. We already have the US Secretary of State making phone calls to the Indian National Security Advisor and the Pakistani National Security Advisor. So the Americans are engaged already. I think there is a sense that further escalation is not going to help anyone. After all, there are 2 nuclear neighbors, and the risks are very high of any kind of miscalculation by either side. So the Indians may say whatever they want, but the danger still continues to exist.
Certainly it does. But are you suggesting, Maliha, that in the short term, whether it's because of international pressure or because Pakistan may feel, not placated is not the right word, but in the short term, that it has responded in some sense because it downed those 5 planes. Do you feel like in the short term the worst is behind us, or is it far too early to say that?
I think it's too early to say that, but I think there will be an exercise of restraint, certainly on Pakistan's side. As I said before, Pakistan did not initiate this, but it has responded already. But again, we have to wait and see what the National Security Committee comes up with. But I think there is a sense here at the top level that this is a time for restraint. This is a time to bring the temperature down, even though there is a lot of anger at the public level in my country.
Of course, as you say, Pakistan did not initiate this, and you know, there's no suggestion that the Pakistani state, excuse me, the Pakistani state did. But does India have some right to respond to the terrorist attack of April 22nd in some way?
I think if we accept that, then we accept the law of the jungle, because India produced no evidence. And there is nothing in international law that allows a country that doesn't produce a shred of evidence to undertake a violation of another country's sovereignty in such a fraught environment. This is an act of extreme irresponsibility by the Indians. I think they have transgressed not just international law, but also international norms and humanity, because targeting civilians is a cowardly act.
Do you think they targeted civilians?
They knew exactly what they were targeting, and they were going to be civilians. I mean, often when countries do that, they turn around and say, oh, sorry, there was some collateral and some civilians got killed. I'm sorry, that's unacceptable. That's not acceptable under international law. Targeting buildings and targeting people. And also, I think your report only said that they attacked Kashmir, but they attacked mainland Pakistan. The attack was in mainland Pakistan. That is a huge violation of international law. They crossed, their missiles crossed the boundary, the international border. What does that mean? That means that they have transgressed international law.
Of course, the Indian Foreign Secretary Bikram Mesri was on our air a moment ago on a press conference saying that their response, in his eyes, was measured, non-escalatory, proportionate and responsible. The other thing, Malia, I'm very interested to get your take on was something else that the Indian Foreign Secretary said. He said that further attacks on India were impending, and these actions were in part to deter and preempt. What is your thought on that?
Well, again, you know, if you produce no evidence, you can say whatever you like. But the reality is that 26 people are dead in Pakistan. They're civilians. They were killed in the Indian attack. So the Indian Foreign Secretary can talk about calibrated attacks and how limited they were. But if limited attacks produce this impact, then I'm afraid Pakistan has also every right to respond.
Is it fair to suggest that some of these sites that have been hit did contain terrorists?
Well, where's the evidence? I mean, we can say whatever we like. I mean, anybody can say whatever they like. I'd like to see the evidence. We would like to see the evidence. I mean, the attack in Kashmir, which triggered this whole confrontation, in that attack also, India did not produce any evidence. Your report or your reporter talked about a UN Security Council meeting. Yes, Pakistan called that meeting. If Pakistan had any sense of guilt, why would it want a meeting of the UN Security Council to be convened? And what did we say in that meeting? We said what we said publicly. We are ready for a neutral investigation into what happened, but we will not accept a situation where India does not produce any evidence, but begins to accuse us within minutes of that attack. India accused Pakistan. I cannot understand how a responsible country can do something like that.
Just to wrap things up, Malia, I mean, it's really interesting hearing your take on this, and I guess it suggests over the course of this interview and this conversation, I guess, a different scale of my interpretation of the likelihood of further response from Pakistan or not. Your final thoughts on that?
As I said, I think it's for the National Security Committee to decide future course of action, but international intervention, particularly the US role. Remember that in all the 5 crises that have occurred in the last 25 years between India and Pakistan, guess who diffused those crises? The United States. So again, the US is going to be playing the role of a fire brigade, as it were. And I hope that this is it for now.
Thanks so much for joining us, Maliha Lodhi, former Pakistan representative to the UN. Mari's back on set with us. Mari, just remind us what we've heard from the government here so far. We're due to hear from Jonathan Reynolds live any moment now.
Yes, so the latest statement we've been given from the Foreign Office says that on the night of the 6th of May, Pakistan Civil Aviation indicated that it was closing Pakistan airspace for at least 48 hours. There are reports of flights being diverted. British nationals should contact their airline for up-to-date information. We are continuing to monitor the situation closely. British nationals should stay up to date with our travel advice and follow the advice of local authorities. And for those who are looking for that advice, it can be found on the government website. And then we've had a statement overnight from the spokesman for the UN chief, the UN Secretary General. So this quote says, the Secretary General is very concerned about the Indian military operations across the line of control and international border. He calls for maximum military restraint from both countries. The world cannot afford a military confrontation between India and Pakistan. And then finally, in terms of international reaction as well, we've had US President Donald Trump also speaking to journalists, and hopefully we can have a listen to what he said to journalists as this was breaking live.
No, it's a shame. We just heard about it just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time. You know, they've been fighting for many, many decades and centuries, actually, if you really think about it. No, I just hope it ends very quickly.
Well, let's get reaction now from the government on this breaking news story this morning. I'm delighted to say the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you, Business Secretary. What's your response to the overnight military exchanges between Israel and Pakistan?
Of course, it's always worrying. This is a long-running conflict, very sadly. Both partners, India, Pakistan, have an interest in regional stability, and we're a friend and partner to both countries. So anything we can do from the United Kingdom, in terms of dialogue, in terms of de-escalation, we stand ready and able to do so.
What might that involve? I mean, we have a relatively recent example of this in 2019. Are you hopeful? Are you confident that the worst is behind us this morning or not?
Well, you will understand that when there is action of this kind, we can anticipate it. We wouldn't have shared with us the details of the retaliatory response. I do know the Foreign Secretary's reached out to both partners, as have our American allies and other key partners, other key European allies as part of this. Sometimes what is required is a trusted channel of communication. That is for both parties to decide if that is the way forward. But they both do have that interest in de-escalation and, of course, in regional stability.
You were in India just this last week. Did you have any conversations about how they were planning to respond to the terrorist attack of the 22nd of April?
No, not quite. So our Indian colleagues were here in the UK rather than myself in India. My department, my counterparts, you will understand, we focus very much on commercial business, trade matters. Of course, we expressed our condolences for the appalling terrorist attack and loss of life that had experienced, and some conversation about that. But the details of that would not be shared with me as Business and Trade Secretary.
This might seem like a silly question, but I feel like it's needed to be asked. What was the exact reason for the timing of announcing the trade deal yesterday?
Well, look, first of all, these talks have been going on for a long period of time. They're not easy to resolve. They're very complex. And when you have the chance to resolve them, you have to take that opportunity. There'll always be someone saying there's a reason you shouldn't necessarily proceed at any one time. But this is a major gain for the UK. I think good trade deals benefit both parties. This is a good example of that. This is a major win for the UK. And having come to agreement, we had to take the opportunity to seal that deal.
And I guess I want to get into the deal next, but to be clear, this time yesterday, when you were knowing you were going to announce the deal yesterday, you had no idea whatsoever that India was planning its response that following evening?
No, I had no details of that. I mean, you will understand in a situation like this, we might anticipate there would be some sort of response to that terrible terrorist attack that India made. But no, for me, it's the business and commercial matters that we focus on with our counterparts.
In terms of the scale of the trade deal, talk us through the difference it will make to the UK's economy.
Look, it's a tremendous deal for the UK. It will mean faster growth, higher wages, more jobs, more tax revenue for every bit of the UK. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. This is the best deal they've ever done with anyone in terms of the benefits we've got. Some specific things will be of interest to viewers. So India is the biggest whiskey market in the world. We're pretty good at that. Tariff is 150% at the minute. It halves immediately and then falls to 40% over time. For electric vehicles, for the higher value vehicles that we specialise in the UK, 110% tariff on electric vehicles at the minute. That will fall to 10%. Salmon and lamb is a tariff of 33%. That goes away immediately. But perhaps even more exciting than that, for a services-based economy, Indian government procurement, that's a lot of money. It's worth about £38 billion a year. We are now the only other country in the world with exclusive access to that market. So this is going to mean more jobs, more growth, higher wages. When we talk about the government's plan for change, about getting on, showing people we can make them better off, this is exactly the kind of decisive action we need.
In terms of the tariffs, I mean, it's interesting to hear. To be honest, I didn't know that it was 150% to start on whiskey. And it's halved, that's great. But 75% is still pretty high.
Well, that's why it comes down to 40% in time.
Well, 40% is still pretty high. And I guess the difference when we look at this is it's not like we need to do a favour for a small emerging market or which might be the sort of history behind a high tariff. India is the fourth biggest economy in the world. Good chance it'll be the biggest one day. What's the point of doing a deal with an economy bigger than ours that's called free trade when we still have 75% tariffs?
Well, it's going to be 40%, let's be clear on that. The
Yeah,
Scotch Whisky Association have said it's transformational. It'll be perhaps £1 billion of additional exports to India. It will mean well over 1,000 new jobs. I mean, this is the kind of win that really makes a difference over the long term as well. So an extra £5 billion a year to the economy in the UK every year, and access to this market to be in a position. Now, India might in future do comparable trade deals or something close perhaps with other countries, although it's pretty hard to get these across the line. We've got guarantees in there that we'll get the best as anybody else that they do trade with. So we've got this exclusive position with the fastest growing major economy in the world and a guarantee of that in future. And a whole new phase of UK-India relationships, a really positive basis for the future. I mean, this is exciting stuff and it makes a difference. It's good for all bits of the UK. I think for Scotland, the Midlands, the North, because of where industries are located, it is particularly good as well.
So I mean, obviously that's one of the positive sides of it. The other question is the cost. What are we giving up to get there? And one of those that's got a lot of focus is the fact that national insurance contributions won't have to be paid by workers that come in from India for a 3-year period only. This is an area that the last government, according to senior sources, didn't want to do a deal because of. Was that a very tough decision on your part to agree to that?
Well, let's just be clear about this. No British worker is being undercut by this. I would never do a deal that undercuts British workers. We have agreements in place with 50 countries for
that's fine, but let's unpack your first point on this.
Yeah.
How is it the case that no British worker is undercut on this when specifically, if an Indian company based here decides to move one of their Indian workers over for 3 years, they will be taxed at a lower rate? So that does undercut British
They will pay. It's a specific situation, as you say, where if you have an Indian company moving someone to the UK for a temporary period, or a UK company moving someone from the UK to India for a temporary period, the UK worker pays into our system now, not the Indian system, and the Indian worker pays into their system, not our system. So at the minute, they would pay twice. We have agreements in place with 50 countries for exactly the same thing. The last Conservative government did one for longer times. So no one is being undercut. It's very important. You don't pay into both systems. You don't get any benefits from paying into the UK. Indian workers in the Indian system, British workers in the British system.
But India's got over 1 billion people, so I think one workforce is more threatened than the other. Forget what other deals are in place with other countries. How is it not the case that we are undercutting British workers if an Indian worker, whether it's for 3 years or not, is taxed at a lower rate than the British worker?
Because the business would still be paying into the Indian social security system, and actually the cost to bring that worker would be high. You'd still pay, for instance, the NHS. But that doesn't matter. Snapshot where we are today. Tata Motors or Tata Steel, big Indian company here. If they wanted to hire a new worker today, they would have to hire a British worker or an Indian or a French or a German worker and pay the same tax rate. As of when the deal is signed, they can bring an Indian worker over and pay a lower tax rate. Well, they would pay into the Indian system, so they're not paying twice.
But they do already.
But that's the same for the USA, for Canada, for Japan, for the EU.
That doesn't matter. But I get that. Deal side. Yeah. What you're acknowledging is this is a different tax rate.
No, I don't. No one is being undercut by this agreement. It means you don't pay twice, but you don't get any benefits from paying into the UK. And the costs of bringing that worker from India, same as bringing the UK worker to India, would be higher because you've got additional costs of doing that. Where I do think we will see a movement of people, I think we'll have more UK workers in India because of the access to the Indian market that we've opened up. So they won't pay twice. They will pay into our system, as Indian workers will pay into their system, and the business costs as well will reflect that. But it is wrong to say India's being offered something different to what we have with the USA or the EU or Canada or Japan or Israel or a whole range of countries. This is not.
That's fine.
This is not a tangible issue. This is the Conservative Party and Reform unable to accept that this Labour government has done what they couldn't do and get this deal across the line, inventing a false reason why they couldn't get it across the line.
This has got nothing to do with the Conservatives or Reform. This is Wilfred Frost at Sky News asking you a fact-based question. You said it is wrong to say it's different from what we have with other countries.
Yeah.
It is right to say it is different from what we currently have with India. And the reality, after this trade deal, as things stand, if you hire an Indian worker, they will be taxed at a lower rate than a British worker.
No, not if you hire an Indian worker. If you temporarily move somebody over for a short period of time from India to the UK...
They will be taxed at a lower rate than a British worker.
No, they will pay the Indian tax rate and our workers will pay the British tax rate.
But which is higher?
Well, what it means is you're not paying twice. We're not getting any benefits from paying into the UK. So the reason you have this is you have... And by the way, any foreign worker coming to the UK is already exempt for 1 year. These additional agreements with other countries just top that up to some degree. So to present this as something undercutting British workers or unique to India is absolutely false. This is just what we have in place with a whole range of key trading partners.
I'm not saying
it's about the benefits we get and the net benefits to the UK. There's more money coming to the taxpayer as a result of this deal.
I'm not saying it's unique to India. I'm saying it's different to what exists currently with India. And you might well argue that overall the trade deal is worth it because whiskey exporters are going to sell a lot more whiskey into India. That's fine. But specifically as it relates to workers in Britain, there is a cost to pay, and this is one of them.
No, I don't accept anyone as being undercut by this. I don't accept what we have with all these 50 other countries undercuts British workers. It means that foreign workers pay into their system and UK workers abroad pay into our system. They're not taxed twice. I think that's fair. But it doesn't mean that anyone is being undercut. And to present that as a reason to not do a deal of this kind, when it's worth £5 billion every year to the British economy, when it means more exports, more jobs, more tax revenue. I mean, the gain to the exchequer, it's not a cost, it's a gain in terms of the money coming in from this economic activity. So this is a great deal for the UK.
So on that, just specifically, if it has been costed fully by the exchequer, you must know the cost to the exchequer of the NIC part of this deal.
Yeah, so it's a fraction of the additional tax revenue that we will get in as a result of doing this.
But it is a tax cost.
Well,
can we have that number? Because I haven't seen it yet.
It's not a cost. The exchequer, there's more tax revenue coming to the country as a result of this deal. So it's worth over £1 billion in additional tax revenue to the UK, and the cost of this change to what we call a double contributions convention, less than a tenth of that.
But it's factored into that 1 billion figure.
No, of course, because the tariffs we're saving on exports to India, over time, over 10 years, nearly £900 million. The tariffs India is saving are a lot less than that because our tariffs are relatively lower to begin with. So you're always trying to get what is the position you can do a deal on as part of this. The kinds of other requests India have made are mainly around areas like clothing and footwear. Of course, that also means cheaper consumer goods for people in Britain.
My final question, Business Secretary, it wasn't in either press release as far as I could see. Is there any conversations about military equipment being sold to India?
We are not traditionally a significant supplier of military equipment to India. The French have a stronger relationship in that sense. We would always be willing to talk to a fellow democracy if that was something they were interested in, but it's not a specific part of the trade deal. But I do think we should be proud of our defence sector, keeping us safe, a domestic industry providing good jobs in all parts of the country. And a key part of the success of the defence sector is exporting to other markets around the world. So that's a good thing, and we shouldn't be squeamish about it. We should be proud that we've got the capacity to defend ourselves in the United Kingdom and be willing to sell that abroad.
Business Secretary, always a pleasure to catch up. I know you've been busy at the moment. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Jonathan Reynolds there. It's 7:30. Let's bring you up to speed on the headlines of the morning. The international community is urging calm after India launched airstrikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Islamabad says that 26 people were killed, including a child, calling the attacks cowardly and a blatant act of war to which they will respond. There have been deaths on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir as a result of shelling between the two sides. Well, this is some of the key points that we've learned so far. India says it has struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir in what it said was a focused, measured and non-escalatory manner. But Pakistan's defence minister said all the areas hit were civilian places, with the Pakistan Army chief saying at least 26 people have been killed and 46 injured. Police officials in Indian-controlled Kashmir say at least 10 people have been killed, 48 injured during Pakistani shelling. And the United Nations Secretary-General has called for maximum military restraint from both countries, saying the world cannot afford a confrontation between India and Pakistan. A short time ago, India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri gave this update.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. You would also recall that the Security Council on 25th April 2025 had issued a press statement on the Pahalgam terror attack, underlining, and I quote, the need to hold perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of this reprehensible act of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice.
Let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch. Cordelia, first just let's step back a second and just sum up for us the scale of what we've seen in terms of military exchanges between both of these two countries in the last 12 hours relative to the last decade or so.
Well, I think what's particularly striking about this inflection point is that India struck deeper into Pakistan than it has since the 1971 war. These are two nations that have had decades of conflict, 3 wars. But the most recent strike back in 2019, this is certainly more significant than that they went into Punjab province. Now, the Indians say that this was proportionate, that it was focused, and that it is not an escalation of the tensions between them. But Pakistan, in turn, says it is an unprovoked and blatant act of war. And now, it must be said also that the attack in Kashmir on civilians was also the most significant in decades. And India are firmly pointing the finger at Pakistan and their alleged involvement in this, which Pakistan completely refutes. So I think what we have seen here is a worrying moment, it's a serious moment, and it's a fluid one too. But it's also a time when we need to try and avoid hyperbole, because there is a lot of diplomacy going on behind the scenes. We've seen Russia, China, neighboring Iran talk to India and Pakistan. We've also seen China too speaking with India and Pakistan as well. You've got the UN urging restraint also, and the UAE. That everyone is coalescing around this moment and trying to urge caution. I think a response from Pakistan is inevitable. They say that that will come at a time of their own choosing, a place of their own choosing too. The question is, how significant will it be? We have a number of civilians, at least 25 now, that Pakistan say have died in these attacks overnight. Now, interestingly, the airspace in and around Lahore and Karachi has reopened. It's still closed around Islamabad. So I think some indication of reduced anxieties within Pakistan, but certainly no one can take anything for granted right now. You have two nations that have strong nationalist impulses. I think the international community is doing all it can. Historically, they have stepped in to try and broker agreements between the two countries. There's been a sort of context over the last couple of weeks since that Kashmir attack when you've seen a kind of tit for tat in diplomacy between the two countries. And very significantly, you had India pulling out of the Indus Water Treaty. Now, Pakistan has made clear if India blocks the flow of water to Pakistan, they would regard that as an act of war. It would be very significant indeed. That has not come to pass yet, but it is an illustration, this kind of ratcheting up of tensions between the two. But there is a lot to lose. This is clearly two nuclear armed nations, and I think you have two countries that want to show they have responded, that they've taken control, and that they've retaliated as they see fit. But I think conversation around two countries on the brink of war feels premature at this point, but certainly a worrying time.
Cordy, one other question I have is the extent to which we have certainty on anything that's happened in the course of the last month or two. We've had a number of guests in the last hour from the Pakistan side saying, you know, that the Indian side has not even shown evidence for the April 22nd terrorist attack, and it's precisely why they feel Pakistan was in any way responsible. Clearly, we don't have specific details of the number of deaths and exactly where they were in the attacks overnight from India, and whether they were specifically on terrorist sites or not. What do we know for certain at this point, or are we currently in the international press community operating from somewhat of a vacuum?
I think that's fair to say, certainly a vacuum, and in the absence of any real concrete clarification about the sites that were attacked last night. Now, we were told by India that it was terrorist infrastructure they targeted. The Pakistanis say amongst those targets, a madrasa was hit, effectively a school within Pakistan. We know at least one child has died, for instance. But it is India's contention that these were terrorist targets. It is civilians, though, that are among the dead. So certainly plenty of grey zone within that. Then you have this Kashmir attack a couple of weeks ago. Now, no one single group has claimed total responsibility for that. It is the claim of India that there is a Pakistani offshoot that was responsible, that two Pakistani citizens were involved in that attack, but Islamabad denies that. And so you have effectively two countries ratcheting up the tension between each other. Both feel on the right side of history and the need to respond, and yet neither are producing really any in-depth evidence of their claims. I think if India and New Delhi is able to do that, and they start to presenting in some more granular detail who may have been behind this attack inside Kashmir, well, that then might preface something more serious. But they've clearly decided to take the strikes and the military action they have so far. I think the ball is now in Pakistan's court in terms of what it decides to do in response.
Cordy, thanks so much for that, much appreciated. Now, India and Pakistan have a history of war and conflict going back decades. Kashmir has been one of the greatest causes of dispute. India's independence in 1947 came with partition and conflict over which states would join India and which would join Pakistan. Islamabad supported a Muslim insurgency in Kashmir whose leader appealed to India for support. Both countries claim Kashmir in full but control only part, and a border dispute led to a second war in 1965. 6 years later, they fought another war when East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, declared independence. Conflict erupted again in 1999 after India launched airstrikes against Pakistani-backed fighters after Pakistani troops infiltrated Indian-administered Kashmir north of Kargil. In 2016, India conducted strikes on alleged Islamist militant launch pads in Pakistani territory after gunmen stormed an Indian military base in Kashmir's Uri region. And in 2019, there was again fighting between the two sides after a suicide car bombing, which led to the capture of an Indian pilot. A short and select history of the conflict there for you. Let's now bring in from Islamabad Dr. Kamar Chima, Executive Director at the Sanabur Institute. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Chima, this morning. First, quick question, if you can, just looking forwards, and then we'll dissect what happened looking backwards. is your interpretation that Pakistani authorities are pausing in terms of their potential response to the Indian strike overnight? Or do you think in the hours ahead, the days ahead, there could be further retaliation?
Well, Pakistan's government has already said that the time and place will be Pakistan's choosing. So far, what has happened, this was not Pakistan's response. The response is yet to come. But in between what we have heard from the Reuters and the Hindu newspaper of India, that 3 Indian fighter jets have been shot. So last night, it was not a response from Pakistan. The response is yet to come. And obviously, Pakistan's political and military leadership are looking at how we have to respond, because Pakistan's mainland was targeted back in 2019. At that time, in Balakot, India did violate international law. And now again, the main cities of Pakistan have been targeted. So Pakistan reserves the right to attack at places where Pakistan believes are choice of the Pakistani military.
Did you expect, and is there justification for some level of response from India following the April 22nd terrorist attack?
The question is, India never provided any kind of information. Pakistani government, along with the international community, has been asking for any kind of information. And Pakistan asked for cooperation in any kind of a joint investigation where impartial players can join. But unfortunately, India never came up with evidence, never shared with Pakistan, never shared with the international community. And today we are seeing that this is a violation of international law. And obviously, India did waste the time. India had opened direct communication line with Pakistan. The American government, the rest of the international community did ask Pakistan. Pakistan sensitized international society about India's possible aggression. I think this is a new law in the Pakistan-India relations, where even 65 years old treaties have been cancelled. So I think without performing, without giving evidence, attacking Pakistan does not make sense. And that is why President Trump yesterday called it shame.
If it is a new low in the relationship between the two countries, are you expectant or fearful of a new high in terms of the scale of military conflict, or are you hopeful that there will be a calming down of tensions?
Well, I personally believe that the tension will not calm down unless Pakistan gives a befitting response, and that response will be given definitely. It cannot happen that they can attack Pakistan's main cities. Innocent people are killed, children, women, girls are killed, those who are unarmed, they are not combatants, and it cannot go unanswered. The Pakistani people, the forces, the Pakistani government were never aggressors. It was the Indian government which decided to be aggressor, and Pakistan has a full right to respond. And for this matter, obviously, the military must be planning, and at the same time, the Pakistan's political leadership is planning how we have to respond. And we have said it many times to the international community, if India will start the war, then it will be difficult to end, because it was India's decision to start the war. The Pakistan never asked for this. Pakistani side have already been asking for de-escalation, for direct communication, but Pakistan's voice was never heard. Pakistan has already been facing this kind of an aggression coming from the Indian government. And since Prime Minister Modi is in power 2014, you have seen every day there is a deterioration of relations between both the countries. There is not a single day where we can say that both countries are moving forward. Both countries are going backward. All efforts for peace in the decades which both the countries achieved, all those efforts have lost any kind of momentum, and now we have no connection with each other. This is because of the policies of Prime Minister Modi. Otherwise, the Pakistani government is time and again asking for dialogue, for engagement, for opening up a new level of talks between both countries.
Dr. Chima, we thank you for joining us this morning, and going to be back out with our Neville Lazarus in New Delhi shortly, and joined by a guest from India shortly as well. But first, you just want to recap what the government here has said. They've called for both sides to de-escalate, and the Business Secretary, Johnny Reynolds, was with us in the last 20 minutes.
Of course, it's always worrying. This is a long-running conflict, very sadly. Both partners India, Pakistan have an interest in regional stability, and we're a friend and partner to both countries. So anything we can do from the United Kingdom in terms of dialogue, in terms of de-escalation, we stand ready and able to do so.
What might that involve? I mean, we have a relatively recent example of this in 2019. Are you hopeful? Are you confident that the worst is behind us this morning or not?
Well, you will understand that when there is action of this kind, we can anticipate it. We wouldn't have shared with us the details of the retaliatory response. I do know the Foreign Secretary's reached out to both partners, as have our American allies and other key partners, other key European allies as part of this. Sometimes what is required is a trusted channel of communication. That is for both parties to decide if that is the way forward. But they both do have that interest in de-escalation and, of course, in regional stability.
Mari, unsurprising kind of lack of clarity from the government this morning on this, particularly from the business secretary. And there's no blame coming from me in saying this, but clearly not much has been done. And we'll wait to see if anything does happen specifically to try and mediate. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he talked about how he felt that a trusted line of communication would potentially be helpful or a possibility, but that it was up to India and Pakistan whether they wanted that. But the fact that they are mentioning it, they are perhaps gently suggesting it, and that perhaps we could play a part in that in terms of facilitating any de-escalation really does sound like behind the scenes, there probably is quite a lot of diplomatic heavy lifting going on, kind of back-channeling with our counterparts, with India and Pakistan. He did say that the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has been speaking to both parties about this as well. But the details on what we are actually doing were few and far between, which I think is important. Obviously, we discussed the trade deal that he announced with India yesterday as well. There's clearly a lot to it, and clearly governments of all political persuasions have wanted this trade deal with India. It's not a small trade deal, and I'm sure the broad terms would have been fairly similar in the grand scheme of things, whoever struck it. The interesting point is the timing of the announcement after the local elections, almost to imply that the government thought it wouldn't help them in the local elections. Again, maybe that's not fair, that's speculation perhaps. But specifically this NIC aspect and the fact that it comes when the government is putting up NIC as well. It's a tough sell, basically. It's a really tough sell, and the reason it's a tough sell, as you rightly point out, is it's not that this is a deal that's completely different from any other deal we have with other countries. And Johnny Reynolds was really, really keen to stress that actually we have that kind of reciprocal no taxing, as it were, with lots of other countries. So it's nothing new, and he's right to say that. But what the difficulty is, and what Labour are not admitting perhaps that is perhaps a problem politically, is that the timing of increasing national insurance contributions for British employers, while within the same year, within the same 12 months, as it were, you are reducing national insurance contributions for Indian companies and for Indian workers. And yes, he's saying it's on a temporary basis, and therefore the numbers won't impact on the immigration figures that we get out because these workers won't be included in those immigration figures. The difficulty is the optics of it looks like you've said for a very long time there's no money for tax cuts. There's no money to reduce that tax burden that they openly admit is incredibly high and too high. Wes Streeting said that to you yesterday. But nonetheless, then they find money to cut taxes for other people. And that's the optics of it. Whether that's the reality or not is almost beside the point. And that is the difficulty that Labour is going to be facing, I think, in the next few days. Yeah, really, really interesting. And it was a very interesting debate, I thought. And he obviously pushed back with his side of things with Johnny Reynolds earlier. Mari, for now, great stuff. Thanks so much. Let's pivot back to the main story of the day, of course, the military exchanges between India and Pakistan overnight. Joining me now to discuss is the author and journalist Barker Dutt, joining us from Delhi. Thanks so much for joining us on this. First of all, your snapshot as to what feels like is happening looking forward. Do you think there is a pause in hostilities as things stand, or are Indians on tenterhooks as to whether there's further military exchanges to come?
Thank you for having me. I was intrigued by your description of the situation as a military exchange between India and Pakistan. That is certainly not the Indian perspective. Across political lines, across regions, across classes, I think India will see this as a military retaliation for a terror attack that took place a fortnight ago in a tourist area called Pahalgam in Kashmir, where 26 unarmed civilians were killed by Pakistan-backed terror organization Lashkar-e-Taiba and its proxy outfit, the Resistance Front. To that end, what India has done today with 24 missile strikes on 9 terror targets, including in Pakistan's Punjab, it has wide support among the public and the political class here in India. And I should underscore the fact that India has emphasized that it does not want to move, it is not seeking escalation, it has not targeted civilians or Pakistani military installations, focusing instead precisely on terror targets, by the way, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which has been proscribed as a terror organization by the United Kingdom since 2001.
What is your perspective on the Pakistan response that these missiles weren't solely hitting terrorist targets, that some innocent people, at least, were killed?
I think the Indian perspective, and I would agree in my assessment with that perspective, is that the targets identified are well-established terror bases. The Lashkar-e-Taiba headquarters, for example, is in Murid-ke Punjab. The Jaish-e-Mohammed terror outfit is in Bahawalpur, also in Pakistan, Punjab. These are outfits, the ones that I'm mentioning, that are recognized globally as designated terror organizations. I cannot speak to whether there has been inadvertent loss, perhaps, to civilians that may have been in the area, but I can tell you that the government here has asserted, the armed forces have asserted that the targets were specifically and only terror targets, terror bases. And since then, Pakistan has fired at villages along the line of control and the international border in Jammu and Kashmir here in India, and we have information of 3 civilians killed by Pakistani firing. So I think the perspective here is very different from how the Western media or Pakistan is presenting it. We see it very clearly as much needed and much anticipated military response that is targeting the roots of terrorism, seen to be sponsored by all Indians, by the Pakistani state and the beleaguered army chief of Pakistan, Asim Munir.
Is there a belief, are you suggesting that the terrorist attack in April the 22nd was directly supported by the Pakistani state? Because, of course, some of the response, even if it was perfectly targeted just to terrorist bases and there were no civilian casualties, is on Pakistan's sovereign territory, which I guess is something that understandably you would expect a response from Pakistan on.
I think the Indian military would have war-gamed how Pakistan would respond, and its first response has come in the form of firing at civilian areas along the line of control. But yes, to answer your question, not just is there a belief, I think there is enough evidence that the Indian government has shared with governments around the world on the complicity of the terror outfit, which is known as the Lashkar-e-Taiba, in the killing of those civilians at point blank. By the way, they were targeted for their religion. People were lined up and asked whether they were Hindu or Muslim, and when they were Hindu, they were shot dead. We have this from eyewitness testimonies, including people I have interviewed. And one should really underline the fact that the Lashkar, this terror outfit recognized by the United Kingdom to be one as well, has been protected by the Pakistan military for decades altogether. I remember interviewing the former Pakistan Army Chief General Musharraf and asking him about the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and he described them to be patriotic Pakistanis. One of the Lashkar terrorists was spotted in a video just yesterday where he said, "Oh, the Indian Prime Minister wants to kill my father," talking about Hafiz Saeed, once again a globally recognized terrorist. So I think, just to share the sentiments of India, a lot of people here say in a week when the Americans are bombing the Houthis, when Israel is carrying on unrestrained with its attacks in Gaza, for the global community to urge restraint to India seems to Indians hypocritical.
Thanks so much for joining us, Barka Dutt. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
We do have a little bit of breaking news just crossing moments ago that Prime Minister Modi of India has postponed his upcoming trip to Europe. He was due to go to Croatia, the Netherlands and Norway, but he has postponed that trip. As we wrap up the hour, let's bring back in Neville Lazarus, our India reporter. Neville, I'm interested for you to pick up on the comment there, one of the comments from our last guest, about the scale of broad support domestically in India for Prime Minister Modi's actions overnight. Your take on that, and just remind us where he is domestically in terms of his political situation. He just faced an election already recently.
Well, Prime Minister Modi is very much here in Delhi. He's been having a series of meetings with his sort of cabinet, the defence establishment. But his support has been across all sections of society, including the opposition party. The Congress party, Rahul Gandhi, came out in full support of the government, saying whatever they do in terms of retaliation, they are fully behind the government and the Indian military. In terms of the mood of the people, they have been very angry. There's been an uproar after the killing of 26 people in Pahalgam. These were tourists, and this is the first time such large numbers of tourists have been targeted. Earlier, they've been left out by terrorists, but this time they were the main target. And the way they were killed, the men were brought together and then shot and killed. And so there was uproar and anger, and that's why we've seen sort of a big support in whatever retaliatory methods the government has used.
Neville, thanks so much for that. We'll be right back out with Neville in just a few moments. Our India reporter there in New Delhi. We're going to take a very quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. When we come back, we'll have all of the day's top stories for you. Of course, the very latest on this unfolding conflict between India and Pakistan. We'll also be live in the Vatican ahead of the conclave.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Breaking news. India has launched airstrikes against Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. It's Wednesday, the 7th of May. Dozens of people killed as India and Pakistan exchanged fire in disputed Kashmir. Pakistan claims to have shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and a drone. India says the world must show zero tolerance for terrorism, and it acted in response to an attack on tourists last month. The British government calls for de-escalation from both countries.
And here in Rome, the countdown is on for cardinals to pick a new pope ahead of the first conclave vote later today.
A very good morning to you. The international community is urging calm after India launched airstrikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Islamabad says that 26 people were killed, including a child, calling the attacks cowardly and a blatant act of war to which they will respond. There have also been deaths on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir as a result of shelling between the two sides. Well, here is a summary of what we know so far from the exchanges overnight. India says it has struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir in what it said was a, quote, focused, measured and non-escalatory manner. But Pakistan's defence minister said all the areas hit were civilian places, with the Pakistan army chief saying that at least 26 people have been killed and 46 injured. Pakistan says it has shot down 5 Indian jets and that there has been shelling across the border. Police officials in Indian-controlled Kashmir say at least 10 people have been killed and 48 injured. The UN Secretary-General has called for maximum military restraint from both countries, saying the world cannot afford a confrontation between India and Pakistan. Well, our first report comes from our reporter, Neville Lazarus, from the Indian capital, New Delhi.
It's what the world feared and Pakistan expected. Loud explosions filled the sky in the early hours of the morning in Pakistan's controlled territory of Kashmir. Pakistan claims civilians have been killed, including a child, and several injured, describing the attack as a blatant act of war. India says they hit terrorist infrastructure. Its defense ministry released a statement saying, altogether 9 sites have been targeted. Our actions have been focused, measured and non-escalatory in nature. No Pakistani military facility have been targeted. India has demonstrated considerable restraint in selection of targets and method of execution. These steps came in the wake of the barbaric Pahalgam terrorist attack in which 25 Indians and 1 Nepali citizen were murdered. We are living up to the commitment that those responsible for this attack will be held accountable. Pakistan Air Defences says they have downed Indian planes. Those claims have not been confirmed. There has been intense shelling and firing across the line of control.
Pakistan has a right to respond. Pakistan will respond. As I've said before, we had an apprehension that India will attack. Pakistan has never struck first, but we have the right to self-defense.
Kashmir is the crown over which the 2 nuclear-armed neighbors have fought several wars and are in a perpetual state of tension. These attacks can soon become a flashpoint that the world needs to be worried of its consequence. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Delhi.
Well, before we bring in Neville live, let's just give you an update or reminder of the geography of all that's happening. India says the areas that they targeted were in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. Let's have a look. The majority of the areas they targeted, as you can see from this map, were in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. These sites in the north side of this picture, according to the Indian military, are training grounds for banned terror groups. The target at the bottom is in Punjab, in Pakistan itself, which is home to the headquarters of the terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed, according to Indian authorities. According to them, the compound there has facilities for religious indoctrination and military-style training. Well, earlier today, we heard from India's Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. You would also recall that the Security Council on 25th April 2025 had issued a press statement on the Pahalgam terror attack, underlining, and I quote, the need to hold perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of this reprehensible act of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice.
Well, delighted to say that Neville Lazarus joins us now live from New Delhi once again. Neville, for those people just joining us, bring us up to speed on the scale of what we have seen in the last 12 hours relative to recent history.
Well, now we have a bit more information from the Defence Ministry. Sources said that the 25 minutes, there were 24 missiles that hit the 9 targets. This came with various missile capacities and even some drones. But nevertheless, there has been, after that, heavy shelling and firing across the line of control, across both militaries, shelling each other, and we have reports of several deaths taking place on this side of the border. In Kupwara region, several homes damaged. There's similar reports coming from the other side of the border. Now, we are in a very tense situation. Both sides have called each other out, saying that these are attacks which have come on their sovereign territory, and that's what Pakistan has said. Earlier, the attacks we've seen in 2019, the surgical strikes that took place in Balakot, which is in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. This time, the missile attacks have come beyond that, beyond the international border in Pakistan, over Pakistani sovereign territory, and that's what has irked the Pakistani establishment, government, military, and they say that they will retaliate on the choosing of their time and place. Now, India has said that these were non-escalatory attacks and were only on terror targets, terror camps of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Hizbul Mujahideen, and also the resistance force, which was who was responsible for the attacks on the 22nd of April on the tourists, killing 26 of them. This obviously is escalating. It depends of the retaliation from Pakistan now, and then a rebuttal from India. So at the moment, very tense on both sides of the border, and the world will need to be worried about the consequence if two nuclear neighbors with decades of hostility get going with each other over military and across the border of sort of war.
Neville, thanks so much as always. On that very note, the government here is urging calm. The Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, spoke to us a few hours ago.
Of course, it's always worrying. This is a long-running conflict, very sadly. Both partners, India, Pakistan, have an interest in regional stability, and we're a friend and partner to both countries. So anything we can do from the United Kingdom, in terms of dialogue, in terms of de-escalation, we stand ready and able to do so.
What might that involve? I mean, we have a relatively recent example of this in 2019. Are you hopeful? Are you confident that the worst is behind us this morning or not?
Well, you will understand that when there is action of this kind, we can anticipate it. We wouldn't have shared with us the details of the retaliatory response. I do know the Foreign Secretary's reached out to both partners, as have our American allies and other key partners, other key European allies as part of this. Sometimes what is required is a trusted channel of communication. That is for both parties to decide if that is the way forward. But they both do have that interest in de-escalation and, of course, in regional stability.
Mari's here with me on. So what else have we heard from the government this morning and from other international corners?
So the Foreign Office released a statement where they advised anyone who was in the region to be going to the government website, making sure they're checking the travel advice. And then, as you saw from Jonathan Reynolds there, he was talking about whether there might be a trusted channel of communication if that is what India and Pakistan want, only if that is what they want, and that the UK would stand ready to help with that, to help with any de-escalation that was required or requested, and that also the Foreign Secretary had been in touch with both counterparts for India and Pakistan as well. And then also, Donald Trump has been speaking. This was happening when it was breaking kind of during a press conference, and we can have a listen to what the US President's comments had to say.
No, it's a shame. We just heard about it, just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time. You know, they've been fighting for many, many decades and centuries, actually, if you really think about it. No, I just hope it ends very quickly.
So you see that Trump says, I'm hoping it ends very quickly. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, has echoed those remarks as well. And then when it comes to the UN chief, the Secretary General, a spokesperson's given us a statement on behalf of him as well, where they said the Secretary General is very concerned about the Indian military operations across the line of control and international border. He calls for maximum military restraint from both countries. The world cannot afford a military confrontation between India and Pakistan. And as you rightly pointed out with Jonathan Reynolds, and I know we'll speak about this more in depth later, but the timing of this while the UK has announced a trade deal with India is interesting, to say the least.
It certainly is. We'll talk a bit more about that a little later. Mari, thanks so much for that. Let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch. Cordy, do these two countries listen to the international community? Who do they listen to most? Presumably the United States, and we have a little bit of a blueprint of that from 2019.
Yeah, we do. And look, historically, the international community has played a role in trying to de-escalate tensions between the two. I think it's notable that the US is somewhat distracted by entanglements elsewhere in the world, and also a lot within its own domestic agenda, of course. So we can't assume that they are going to respond to the request to calm things down. We have heard from the UN, we've seen Russia, China, neighbouring Iran, all calling for a de-escalation and urging calm. But I think the domestic audience for both countries is important too. And we've seen Narendra Modi under a lot of pressure domestically to respond to these attacks, the worst attacks on civilians for many years. Equally, you've got the muscular strongman that is Modi, but you've also got the head of the army in Pakistan who also has nationalist impulses and will want to be seen to responding to this, which is the worst attack that we've seen, a much sort of deeper attack into Pakistan, into Punjab, than we have witnessed since the 1971 war. So this is a kind of line in the sand that's been crossed for Pakistan. It is, though, something that was anticipated. We knew that India would strike. I think what has surprised people is the scale of it and how deep they moved, if you like. But there is a huge amount at stake between these nuclear-armed nations. There has been a lot of diplomacy going on behind the scenes. And so I think sort of conversation, talk of two countries being on the brink of war feels premature, but clearly there is ample scope for miscalculation. Notable that Pakistan has said they will respond at a time and place of their own choosing, and that they've begun a measured but forceful response. So I think the next 24 hours, 48 hours will be critical.
Cordy, obviously we've been speaking a lot to Neville in Delhi, and I know you've spent a fair amount of time in recent years reporting from Pakistan itself. Some of our guests from Pakistan this morning have criticised India for the idea of invading or with a missile, sovereign Pakistani territory, regardless of the fact that there was this terrorist attack on April the 22nd. What is the thinking in terms of the presence of militants, of terrorists in sovereign Pakistani territory, and the responsibility, I guess, or the legitimacy for India to attack sovereign Pakistan territory?
Well, I think this argument that India makes and has made for many years, that Pakistan has been harbouring, aiding and abetting terrorists within Pakistan, is something that we've been very familiar with. And they claim that it is Pakistani militants that carried out this very forceful, very devastating attack in Kashmir. And so they want to respond. They want an admission by Pakistan. Doesn't look like they're going to get it in any way. Pakistan say no concrete evidence has been provided whatsoever. They claim they had absolutely no knowledge that this attack was going to take place in a touristy area densely populated by civilians. What's interesting, Sky News has spoken recently to the government, and in a fascinating interview with our world lead presenter Yalda Hakim, there was an admission that previously Pakistan has been responsible for or certainly involved in terror activity to some extent, but they deny that that is taking place now. They also have claimed that that has been orchestrated or supported by other members of the international community. But they strongly refute any knowledge or involvement of this Kashmir attack, which came before, of course, these attacks overnight. And so you have two sides just refusing to acknowledge each other's arguments and absolutely determined to respond and to claim victory. And that is why it is such a tense inflection point.
Cordy, as always, thanks so much. We'll be back out with Cordy, indeed with Neville as well, later on this morning. But for now, we're just going to pivot to the other big story of the day, of course, the conclave due to get underway just a matter of hours from now. Mark Austin is in Rome for us now. Mark, over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and you're right. So it is upon us, the conclave, this ancient and deeply orchestrated process to elect the leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics is about to begin, and the setting is one of real splendour, and it is all set for what is going to happen, locked away in that splendour of the Sistine Chapel under Michelangelo's famous fresco. The cardinals, 133 of them, will vote repeatedly, up to 4 times a day from tomorrow, until one candidate gets that 2/3 majority. There will be no contact with the outside world, no TV, no radio, no internet, no phones. And this year we're told they have swept the areas where the cardinals will be for bugging devices, mobile phones. Same goes for every person inside the Vatican, I'm told, during the conclave, from the 2 doctors on hand for any emergencies, dining room staff who look after the cardinals. All vow to observe absolute and perpetual secrecy. And before all that, there is a mass, a big morning of spirituality. Alistair Bruce is with me, followed by a big afternoon and evening of high politics. Talk us through what we're going to see today.
Well, starting in the Great Basilica of St. Peter, there will be this mass, which is to make sure that the cardinals are properly ordered in their mind after celebrating the Last Supper of Jesus Christ, which they believe is always the best way to prepare for these things. And all the cardinals will be there, not just the voters, and they will all dedicate themselves with their prayer for the right outcome, and that the Holy Spirit will be a part of the thinking process that takes place when the conclave begins. But that doesn't start until this afternoon. when the electing cardinals, the 133, will meet in the Pauline Chapel, which is up on the first floor of the Apostolic Palace, and at the given time they will be processed into the Sistine Chapel, where it's all been prepared, all the seats that they will occupy, and they've had to reorder the way it's done in order to fit in all 133. They then themselves, as you were saying, obligate. It'll be very beautiful in the setting that's been prepared over the generations for us to see. And the one vote will take place after every obligation has been done. They'll shut the door, send us all out, and the single vote of today will take place. And then we will see later this evening smoke come from the chimney over there on top of the Sistine Chapel. It's quite difficult to make out.
Most likely black smoke.
Most likely black smoke, I think,
Well,
today. It would be staggering if they got the required two-thirds majority of 89.
Yes, they would have to be pretty well organised.
Yeah.
For that. Alistair, we look forward to that. Siobhan Robbins is down in St Peter's Square. So thousands are expected to come, empty now, or pretty much empty, but thousands are expected to come later this afternoon and tomorrow. It really is difficult to overestimate what a big moment this is for Catholics.
That's exactly right. The police have already told us that they expect 250,000 people to be here in the square when the new Pope is announced. And that will happen on the balcony behind me there at St Peter's Basilica. But before all that, of course, the matter of conclave. And as Alistair was saying, we're just really about half an hour away now from the day's events beginning. So we've got the Mass ahead of the papal election, and then, of course, a break for those cardinals, and then they will process into the Sistine Chapel, and that's when it all starts. And over the last few days, we've been trying to glean from the cardinals who are here who may be a front runner. Yesterday, we managed to catch someone who suggested that the cardinals that they've spoken to all seem to want to continue with Pope Francis's line. He believed it would be a quick election, but then on the other hand, I spoke to another cardinal who said, let's wait to see how united we are when we get into the Sistine Chapel and the electing begins. Now, it will be around 7 o'clock tonight that we're all anxiously waiting and watching for that first plume of smoke. Of course, black means no pope, white means a pope has been elected. Fingers crossed for a quick election. If it happened today, that could be a record breaker. Of course, we know the longest one went for almost 3 years, but we are told, according to that cardinal, that they are united. But there is, of course, a bit of confusion around this because many of those new cardinal electors were appointed by Pope Francis. Some of them don't even know each other. So it will be interesting to see as the days go on how long we have to wait for a decision.
OK, Siobhan, thank you very much indeed. With me now is Christine Allen, Director and Chief Executive of CAFOD, the Catholic Aid Agency. How important a moment do you think this is?
It's historic, isn't it? Electing a new pope, the leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. Yeah, we're really excited, really excited.
And are you looking for a pope in the mould of Francis, in the way that he supported those in need, he supported those in areas of conflict and violence and so forth?
Well, that's our gospel tradition. You know, that's our scriptural imperative as Christians, as Catholics, to respond to those in need, to bring love and peace to the world. And yeah, so we would be looking for that. But Francis followed on a tradition of long tradition of a variety of popes that engaged in social issues. And there are lots of issues in our world today: conflict, hunger, the climate crisis, debt crisis, that the Pope, as a world leader, as a global statesman, needs to take a part of.
How much can a Pope actually do that? I mean, we have war at the moment in Europe, we have war in the Middle East, we have war in Sudan, in Africa, and those wars continue, despite Pope Francis's papacy, and will probably continue despite what the next Pope does. So how much power and how much influence does a Pope really have?
I think there is a huge amount of influence. It might not be always very obvious, but there's two levels to it. One is obviously that global statesman sort of role in terms of, I'm thinking of the time Pope Francis kissed the feet of the warring faction leaders in South Sudan. That really did help break a deadlock. But there's also the reality that on the ground, church organisations like Caritas are really responding to need hugely. And that kind of support, I think, is so important in terms of enabling the Pope as a world leader to also walk that talk as a church.
We're told that Francis was constantly on the phone to the priest in Gaza. I think it was almost daily.
It was nightly, yes.
He was speaking. Yeah. But that war goes on, so he can speak to the priest, but he's not speaking to the people. Well, he may be speaking to the people who matter, but he's not stopping that war.
That's true, but also there's a whole raft of diplomatic work that's going on, that goes on at different levels of the church as well. But nonetheless, it's so important when the Pope speaks out on issues. It's so vital that voice is heard. But if that voice, it doesn't matter whether that voice is heard as long as he's speaking out on it, because if that voice wasn't there, I think things would be a lot worse.
Now, you have a senior role in a Catholic aid agency. Would you like to see women have a much more influential role in the Catholic Church more broadly?
Well, Pope Francis has brought on a lot more women over the last few years, and there are many more women who lead Caritas organisations right across the world. So I think we're continuing on that path, and I think that's an important part. For Pope Francis,
ordaining women.
Well, that's one of those knotty issues that the church has to get.
Do you think it would be
with.
a stronger church if there were women priests and archbishops?
Well, that's a bit above my pay grade.
Right. Well, look, let's try one that's not. Who would you like to see as? Who would you like to see as Pope? Is that above your pay grade as well? You must have a preference.
Well, one of the things that we are keen on is that the Pope continues in that tradition, that long tradition of speaking out, calling for peace, tackling the issues of today.
Okay. Christine, thanks very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
Final word from Alistair Bruce. Well, I guess too short, and, you know, they'll say it's a bit of a stitch-up. Too long and they're dithering, I suppose they can't win.
Yes, but coming back to your comment, I think that the way the Pope has influence is that he reaches into the conscience of believers, but also into the awareness of the world because of the profile of the papacy over 2,000 years. And I think that is considerable. It doesn't stop wars, but it certainly makes the people who start them feel within somewhere of their conscience that there is a voice shouting that this should end, and that the marginalised should be brought into the centre of all thought. And I think that's part of his role.
Right, and on that point of the length of this, when will we see
I think you're right. Well, it's been about 2 days, hasn't it, over the last few...
10 or so.
Yeah, exactly. So I would imagine we'll see that continue. If it goes to 3 days, it'll start to get very interesting.
Yes, the longest is...
2 years.
Yes, 2 or 3 years. So we might be around for a while. But
that was in Viterbo. That was a long time, in the 1200s. So
ages ago, yes,
hopefully
ages ago. All right, well, as you can see there, the scene is set. It all begins with that Mass in about half an hour's time. But for now, from Rome, let's go back to Wilf in London.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Welcome back to Sky News Breakfast. Now, the international community is urging calm after India launched airstrikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir overnight. Islamabad says that 26 people were killed, including a child, calling the attacks, quote, cowardly and a blatant act of war, to which they will respond. There have also been deaths on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir as a result of shelling between the two sides. This is what we know so far. Well, India says it struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir in what it said was a focused, measured and non-escalatory manner. But Pakistan's defence minister said all of the areas hit were civilian places, with the Pakistan army chief saying at least 26 people have been killed and 46 injured. Pakistan says it has shot down 5 Indian jets and there have been shelling across the border. Police officials in Indian-controlled Kashmir say at least 10 people have been killed and 48 injured. The United Nations Secretary-General has called for maximum military restraint from both countries, saying the world cannot afford a confrontation between India and Pakistan. Well, let's show you some of the areas that India say were targeted by the Indian armed forces overnight. In this graph, you can see this map. You can see the majority of the targets were in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, all of that cluster in the north of the picture. These sites, according to the Indian military, are training grounds for banned terror groups. The target at the bottom is in Punjab, Pakistan, which is home to the headquarters of the terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed. According to reports, that compound has facilities for religious indoctrination and military-style training. Well, earlier today, we did hear from India's Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. You would also recall that the Security Council on 25th April 2025 had issued a press statement on the Pahalgam terror attack, underlining, and I quote, the need to hold perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of this reprehensible act of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice.
Joining us now from Delhi is the retired Brigadier Rahul Bonsal, who's also a director at Security Risks Asia. Thanks so much for joining us. Give us a snapshot of the scale of military action that we've seen in the last 12 hours or so between these two countries.
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. Good afternoon in India and good morning in London. Now, the response by the Indian side involved the missile and standoff aircraft missile attacks on 9 targets in Pakistan. All of these were identified as terrorist training camps, terrorist infrastructure, and terrorist organizations for launch pads for going across the Indian side. You may recall that the Indian Prime Minister has very categorically stated after the Pahalgam terror incident that we will destroy and neutralize the terrorist infrastructure and those who are responsible for the terrorist attack in Pahalgam. We saw innocent tourists, including women and children involved in this site. 26 got killed, including 1 citizen from Nepal. And the focus of his deliberation was a targeted attack on the terrorist infrastructure. I think this is exactly what India has carried out last night. 9 terrorist the installations, training camps have been targeted, and principally included 3 terrorist groups which operate in Jammu and Kashmir: Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Hizbul Mujahideen. Now, the pictures which we see from the Pakistan news media itself shows that there has been massive destruction. However, Pakistan is unlikely to claim any of these destroyed, and the story they are putting out is of the civilians. Now, coming on to the line of control, it was anticipated by India that there will be cross-border line of control ceasefire violations, which have been ongoing for the past 5 to 6 days, and they have escalated yesterday night. They have carried out attacks, cross-border ceasefire violations, carried out artillery attacks and small arms firing, which has resulted in several casualties. On the Indian side, the Indian armed forces have also retaliated in response. So that is the situation where both sides have, so for the Indian side, I think this was well accepted. The retributive justice which the Prime Minister talked of has been undertaken. At the same time, none of the military or civilian targets have been hit from the Indian side. So it has been a very, very measured response, calibrated using the extremely sophisticated weapons, which are pinpoint accuracy weapons have been used.
Of course, forgive me for interrupting. Of course,
sure.
You're saying that India didn't hit any military or civilian targets in Pakistan. Of course, Pakistan disagrees with that. They say that innocent people have been killed and that some of the targets had nothing to do with terrorist bases.
Yes, that is the usual narrative which Pakistan puts across. In fact, denial and civilian casualties is a narrative which is generally put across by Pakistan. We have seen in the past as well. In 2016, after the Uri attack, there was a ground operation launched across border. Pakistan said that nothing happened. Nobody came in. Then on 2019, when we carried out the airstrikes in Balakot, similar, again, the response was there. But this time, I think we have taken no chances and we have hit not one, but several targets with pinpoint accuracy. Now Pakistan will continue to claim that there were civilian casualties. And so that is where I think the information, the spectrum lies. And India will surely give adequate proof for that. And even Pakistani media is showing those structures which have been damaged are used by the terrorist groups such as Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Brigadier Rahul Bonsal, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Retired Brigadier and Director at Security Risks Asia. Now, Pakistan's Information Minister joined our Yalda Hakim last night and said that Pakistan has the right to self-defense after India launched those strikes last night.
Pakistan has a right to respond. Pakistan will respond. As I've said before, we had an apprehension that India will attack. Pakistan has never struck first, but we have the right to self-defense. And the way civilians have been targeted, and I have, pictures and images of women and children who are badly injured in hospital. So civilian localities, accommodations, and a mosque which has been attacked. There were no terrorist camps. I myself took foreign journalists and local journalists to an area near the line of control where India had alleged that there are terrorist camps. You see, we are the front-line state against terrorists. How can we...
I'm just going to pick up on a couple of points, Mr. Atullah Tarar. You said that you've already received images of women and children who have been injured. This attack took place roughly about an hour or so ago. Will you be taking international and local journalists to the sites? Because in the past, when Pakistan has made such claims, they haven't allowed any journalists...
I'll stop you right there. I had planned to take them tomorrow morning. We had a plane ready. We had reached out to journalists. We had a confirmed itinerary, a confirmed plan to go to Bahawalpur tomorrow. And I was supposed to fly to Bahawalpur at 7 a.m. in the morning. And at around right after midnight, India has carried out these attacks. So we were going to Muridke, we were going to Bahawalpur, and we were taking 35 journalists with us, including foreign and local journalists. So I was just preparing for the visit tomorrow. As I had visited the LOC, we were going to Bahawalpur and we had to visit this exact place. And the journalists were already ready for the journey. So I think this has been a very, very, I think, unfortunate step by India. We condemn it. We are responding. But to target civilian population, it's extremely unfortunate. And it's
Just
very,
to
very
point
shameful.
out,
Yalda Hakim just last night, and delighted to say that Yalda able to join us now. And Yalda, I mean, I guess for people just joining us this morning and wanting reaction to this, it's not even 12 hours, if I'm right, since this news unfolded, because it broke live on your show last night.
That's right, Wilf. We were expecting, as you were saying earlier, that an attack like this would take place. Pakistan had the intelligence. The Indians were hinting at this. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi just last week said, "We will find the perpetrators to the ends of the earth." And so Pakistan was really waiting for something like this, and they just weren't sure the scale and the extent of the attack. Now, as you say on my program last night, this really unfolded live on air. Initially, Pakistan was saying that 3 missiles had hit 3 different areas. And then the Indian Army came out with a statement saying that they had hit 9 locations, that they were precision strikes, and that they were targeting terrorist camps. The interview you heard there with the information minister shortly after the attack took place was him saying that there are no terrorist camps in Pakistan. Now, why this is important, Wilf, is because for decades, Pakistan has been accused of funding, harboring, backing, giving sanctuary to different terrorist organizations, including the Taliban. As you'll recall, the Taliban fought alongside various different terrorist organizations in Afghanistan for 20 years against NATO forces, including Britain and the United States. And there was huge loss of life. And the United States would often point the finger of blame on Pakistan, saying, "You are taking billions of dollars in military aid from us, and yet you are playing a double game by giving sanctuary to these terrorists who come and launch these attacks on NATO forces within Afghanistan, and then seek sanctuary back in Pakistan." And then, of course, in 2009, Osama bin Laden was discovered near a military compound in Pakistan, in Abbottabad. So a lot of questions were asked from Pakistan. Military aid was cut by the first Trump administration to the country because they said, you know, you need to stop funding and backing these terrorist organizations and using them as proxies. And that is why, Wilf, India pointed the finger of blame on Pakistan, because, of course, during the 2008 Mumbai attack as well, the terrorists were believed to have come from Pakistan and launched that attack, a terrorist group known as Lashkar-e-Toiba. And that is the terrorist group, a splinter group of Lashkar-e-Toiba, has claimed responsibility for the Kashmir attack that took place, which killed 26 civilians in Indian-administered Kashmir just a few weeks ago. And this attack is in retaliation to that.
Yeah, to stick with us, because I'd love to get your further perspective on this topic. But we just wanted to as well play the reaction of the UK government, and this is the Business Secretary, Johnny Reynolds, an hour and a half ago.
Of course, it's always worrying. This is a long-running conflict, very sadly. Both partners, India, Pakistan, have an interest in regional stability, and we're a friend and partner to both countries. So anything we can do from the United Kingdom, in terms of dialogue, in terms of de-escalation, we stand ready and able to do so.
What might that involve? I mean, we have a relatively recent example of this in 2019. Are you hopeful? Are you confident that the worst is behind us this morning or not?
Well, you will understand that when there is action of this kind, we can anticipate it. We wouldn't have shared with us the details of the retaliatory response. I do know the Foreign Secretary's reached out to both partners, as have our American allies and other key partners, other key European allies as part of this. Sometimes what is required is a trusted channel of communication. That is for both parties to decide if that is the way forward. But they both do have that interest in de-escalation and, of course, in regional stability.
Yalda's still with us, of course. Yalda, there's obviously a huge gap between the rhetoric, the interpretation of what's happened overnight, from the two sides, from India and Pakistan. I guess that's not unsurprising. The question is where we go from here. Is it expected that Pakistan will not go quietly, that this big difference in framing of what has happened will need to see a further response? And what international community members do they both listen to? I guess there's some hope from the fact that the Trump administration played a successful role in 2019 in mediating the last significant dispute between India and Pakistan.
Well, Wilf, I've just jumped on your telly, so hopefully someone can connect me and we can talk sort of face to face and not via the phone. But in 2019, Wilf, the situation de-escalated because it escalated. So initially, India launched a series of attacks on different facilities within Pakistan. Now, the difference between 2019 and now is that at the time, the Indian Air Force launched the attacks inside Pakistan airspace. This time, they haven't entered Pakistan airspace. And the reason for that is because in 2019, Pakistan shot down an Indian military jet and captured an Indian pilot. Now, by returning that Indian pilot, in many ways, that de-escalated the situation. And at that time, the Trump administration had shown support for India, and in many ways it has this time as well. While it's called for de-escalation on both sides, J.D. Vance, the vice president, has said that they do expect India to respond in some way, but that Pakistan also needs to take part in whatever investigation takes place. So there has been attempts to de-escalate the situation, but you heard President Donald Trump just yesterday at a press conference when he was asked about this. He said they have been fighting over this disputed area for decades, and he hopes that the situation de-escalates. Marco Rubio has been speaking to the foreign ministers of both countries, trying to bring down the temperature and the rhetoric. But I think it really will come down to how Pakistan now retaliates to this attack.
Well, and precisely on that topic, what is the expectation there? I guess there's been a sort of conflicting set of rhetoric that we've been trying to interpret here on the breakfast show. From, on one level, the very resolute messaging from Islamabad late last night to say that they will respond and it's their choice when they do. But similarly, other comments coming through that they have shot down 5 Indian aircraft and almost some sense that at least gives temporary pause. I guess we all just wait and see at this point.
Yeah, Wilf, I think that we need to take the rhetoric coming out with a pinch of salt. Because last night, when I was speaking to that information minister, he said to me that we've shot down multiple jets, for example. Civilian populations have been targeted and killed as a result of this attack, and that no terrorist facilities have been hit. In the fog of war, we will see a lot of propaganda coming out from both sides. So we really just need to take the information that we're getting at this stage from both sides with a pinch of salt until, and I pushed the minister on this, until you can get journalists to go to the area and verify the information. We really need to be careful about what is coming out from both sides. But as you say, the world is now watching to see how Pakistan reacts to this. Both nations know what's at stake. Both nations are nuclear-armed states, and Pakistan has continued to remind India of that. A number of Pakistani ministers just last week said to the Indians, we have 139 missiles and they're not just there on display, they are pointing in your direction. So the rhetoric alongside the actions, really the temperature is rising, and the international community, including Britain, will be peddling really quite hard at the moment to de-escalate this situation, because right now now in Donald Trump's entry, you've got the war in Gaza that continues between Hamas and Israel. You've got the situation in Ukraine that he's trying to resolve. And now, since 2019, this is the first time that we're seeing a series of airstrikes, and perhaps the sort of the most intensive since at least the 1970s from India into Pakistan.
Yalda, it's interesting you're saying, you know, until international journalists get in there and get to clarify exactly what was and wasn't hit overnight, that we're kind of having to go on both sides, official lines at the moment. Step back for me a week or two. What do we know for certain at this point about the terrorist attacks on the 22nd of April?
That's right. So, as you say, Wilf, at the moment we are in this space of fog of war, and we're hearing all sorts of information come out from both sides. As I said, the information minister and various other Pakistani officials were saying just last night that, you know, within the space of just half an hour or so, they said that they had shot down multiple Indian jets, which is, of course, as I said, what happened in 2019. But if we go back a few weeks to the 22nd of April, Kashmir is an area that has been disputed and is probably one of the biggest flashpoints and one of the most militarized territories on the planet. And it doesn't really, you know, come up in the news agenda or conversation much because there are often things that are playing out there, but it doesn't sort of come to our attention until a terrorist incident like this takes place. Now, on the 22nd of April, it is believed that a splinter group of Lashkar-e-Toiba, a terrorist organization based in Pakistan. The splinter group is known as the Resistance Front, claimed responsibility for an attack that killed 26 civilians, tourists, in Kashmir. And 25 of them were Indian citizens. One was a Nepali citizen. And there was horrific detail emerging of, you know, some of the people being killed at point-blank range. And so, of course, India was left traumatized, outraged by this, and immediately pointed the finger of blame at Pakistan because they said for decades Pakistan has been funding and backing these terrorist organizations. So while the Indian civilian government or the intelligence service or the military and defense establishment are saying, we had nothing to do with this and we can take part in any kind of investigation that might be led by the international community, you know, and they are trying to distance themselves from it. The point that Indians are making is that for decades you funded and backed and given weaponry to these terrorist groups, and now they've come and launched another attack on our soil. And we saw what happened in 2008, for example, in Mumbai, where dozens of people were killed in a number of locations across Mumbai, including the iconic Taj Hotel, where foreign citizens as well as Indian nationals were killed. And so India had vowed to retaliate. The Prime Minister said that they would go after those who were responsible. We heard a number of Indian officials say the same thing. Immediately, Pakistan said, this has got nothing to do with us, but we will respond. You can't point the finger of blame at us. And the rhetoric escalated. And again, like I said, the reason why the international community is alarmed by this is because both states are nuclear rivals, nuclear-armed states, and so they do not want this situation to escalate any further.
Yalda, as always, thanks so much. Great to have you join us, 12 hours or so after the news broke live on your show last night. Yalda Hakim there for us. As we wrap up this hour of Sky News Breakfast, let's get to our other top story of the day. Of course, the Papal Conclave gets underway in just a matter of hours. Mark Austin is in Rome for us. Mark, over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And of course, we will keep you in touch with that story of the Indian attack on Pakistan. But the scene is set right here, as you can see. Things about to get underway on a day of historic drama in the Catholic Church. Before the conclave begins, there is a holy mass for the election of the Roman pontiff, a spiritual start to the day the conclave begins, overseen by the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Giovanni Battista Re. Too old himself to vote, but he'll still play an important part, and that will be the prelude to the beginning of the conclave itself, which of course is draped in tradition and is high politics. And you may have seen you may have seen the film. You may have seen some of the plotting and the scheming in the film Conclave. And those in the know tell me it is all those things and much more besides. And then, of course, there is the smoke. Black smoke means no decision. White smoke means they have their man. Habemus papam. We have a pope, they will say. Alistair Bruce, commentator who will take you through the Mass when it begins in a few minutes' time, is with me here. And it is a big day, isn't it? A day of spectacle.
And a chance just there to see the Sistine Chapel roof just to the right of the clock, which is on the corner of St. Peter's Basilica. And there, the little tiny smokestack, just a quarter of the way up the roof, the slant of the roof itself, up towards that huge aerial to the right. That's where eyes will be after each of the votes, and we will see whether the white smoke comes. But I doubt that'll be today. I think it'll start with the representative vote. That will be a chance for those cardinals who are voting to give the names of the people they want to sort of honour and respect. And it gives a sense of where they all stand in the running order, in reality, after all the discussion.
There are a lot of cardinals as well, aren't there? I mean, 133 cardinals can vote. That means, it could be a longer process?
It does mean it could be a longer process. I think that at the same time, you know, getting the votes is the issue, and getting to 89 is a challenge. We're now inside St. Peter's Basilica, and the service is about to begin in a couple of minutes, which will be the placing of the prayers and the hopes of the Roman Catholic Church through the cardinals here at the central altar of St. Peter's, giving the Mass, which is the heart of the Roman Catholic tradition. And I think we will get the chance to join them in every respect as they prepare to celebrate the Mass. They're one of the Cardinal's Berettas beside his place as those, or I think that's a bishop's beretta. The different colours all represent the different roles that they perform. And so the service will begin in 3 minutes.
And these are all the cardinals. Yeah, these are not just the cardinal electors, the cardinals who can vote. These are all the cardinals.
Will be taking part and for this Mass, but it's only the voting cardinals who we will see this afternoon.
And as I say, this is a Mass which will be overseen by the Dean of the College of Cardinals, a very important man in all this, who, as I say, is too old himself to vote when the conclave begins, but who will nevertheless still play a very important part in all this. And there have already been several days of pre-meetings, congregations, each day meetings where the cardinals can get together and discuss who they want as the next pope. And as well as that, there have been cardinals having dinners together in local restaurants, and as they leave the restaurant, they're pounced upon by journalists who then ask them what's happening, what the discussion is. And the big debate in the Church, of course, is whether the reforms, the progressive nature of Pope Francis's papacy will continue, or whether they have what I suppose could be called a reset, and the pendulum swings back, if you like, to a more traditional conservative papacy. And we probably won't know who the Pope will be today, as Alistair says, but the average over the last 10 conclaves has been between 2 and 3 days. So the feeling is here by the end of the week, we will know who the new Pope is. And as we approach the top of the hour, I will hand you over to Alistair Bruce.
The heart of the Roman Catholic Church at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the beginning of the Mass to dedicate all those present to the process of the election of the next Pope. And the words of the introductory rites. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who shall do according to my heart and mind. I will establish a lasting house for him. Alleluia. And the procession of the celebrants and the deacons moving to the altar of the confession over the tomb of St. Peter. The conclave to elect the successor to St. Peter the 267th will begin later today, but all those gathered here in congregation and to celebrate this Mass will be dedicating their prayers to the electing 133 cardinals who celebrate today, but on whose shoulders, for the Roman Catholic Church, is such a heavy burden. The deacon carrying the Holy Gospel, which will be placed reverently upon the altar. And it's from its pages that the words for the Gospel will come later on. And it is to the words of that Gospel that the celebrant today, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, will make his homily. His last chance as Dean of the College of Cardinals to encourage and shape the process of the election of the next Pope. the cardinals are con-celebrating, which means that they will be helping the Dean with the celebration of this Holy Mass. Therefore, all of them are wearing the red chasuble as priests celebrating the Mass and carrying their mitres according to the Roman rite, and with the red zucchetto on their heads, which also represents their rank, and red, the colour of the cardinals, demonstrating their promise that they will lay down their life for the Church and representing the blood of Christ. The Mass is a celebration of the Last Supper that Jesus Christ had with his 12 disciples. During it, he lifted bread and wine and told them to celebrate as he did, and that the bread would become his body and the wine would become his blood, and that through it, salvation, forgiveness, and a striving to ultimately live in the eternity of God would be promised. And wearing his mitre, the celebrant of the Mass venerates the altar. The Dean of the College of Cardinals, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, escorted to his seat, where he will start the Mass by invoking the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and offering peace, and leading the penitential act. He will now go around this altar of the confession directly above the tomb of St. Peter, venerating with the thurible, and the smoke is intended to purify and worship the altar prior to the worship, and also to represent the prayers of those faithful here as he goes to reverence the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. After completing his reverence, he will be reverenced himself and then make his way to the seat at the beginning of this Mass. Set underneath the great bronze baldacchino created to go over this altar and to be the focus of prayer.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pax vobis.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, peace be with you. Brethren, let us acknowledge our sins and so prepare ourselves to celebrate the sacred mysteries.
Confiteor de omnipotenti.
I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done and in what I have failed to do, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Therefore, I ask Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our Father. May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us our sins, and bring us to everlasting life. We now move into the Kyrie, which is a call for God's mercy.
So the Mass has begun. This is, of course, the prelude to the conclave itself, which begins later today, this afternoon. And we will leave the Mass for the moment, because there is a lot going on in the world news-wise. And so for more of that, let's go back to Wilf in the studio.
Mark, Alistair, thanks so much for that. And as Mark said, back with him and Alistair and the team in Rome and the Vatican in the coming days as the conclave gets underway. Let's bring you up to speed on our other main story of the day. The international community is urging calm after India launched airstrikes on Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Islamabad says that 26 people were killed, including a child, calling the attacks cowardly and a blatant act of war to which they will respond. There have also been deaths on the Indian side of the line of control in Kashmir as a result of shelling between the two sides. This is what we know so far. Well, India says it has struck 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-controlled Kashmir in what it said was a focused, measured and non-escalatory manner. But Pakistan's defence minister said all the areas hit were civilian places, with the Pakistan Army chief saying at least 26 people have been killed and 46 injured. Pakistan says it has shot down 5 Indian jets and there has been shelling across the border. Police officials in Indian-controlled Kashmir say at least 10 people have been killed and 48 injured. And the United Nations Secretary-General has called for maximum military restraint from both countries, saying the world cannot afford a confrontation between India and Pakistan. Here is our first report from Neville Lazarus in New Delhi.
It's what the world feared and Pakistan expected. Loud explosions filled the sky in the early hours of the morning in Pakistan's controlled territory of Kashmir. Pakistan claims civilians have been killed, including a child, and several injured, describing the attack as a blatant act of war. In a briefing, India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri has said they hit terrorist infrastructure to stop them from entering the country.
It was deemed essential that the perpetrators and planners of the 22nd April attack be brought to justice. Despite a fortnight having passed since the attacks, there has been no demonstrable step from Pakistan to take action against the terrorist infrastructure on its territory or on territory under its control. Instead, all it has indulged in are denials and allegations. Our intelligence monitoring of Pakistan-based terrorist modules indicated that further attacks against India were impending. There was thus a compulsion both to deter and to preempt.
Pakistan Air Defences says they have downed Indian planes. Those claims have not been confirmed. There has been intense shelling and firing across the line of control.
Pakistan has a right to respond. Pakistan will respond. As I've said before, we had an apprehension that India will attack. Pakistan has never struck first, but we have the right to self-defense.
Kashmir is the crown over which the two nuclear-armed neighbours have fought several wars and are in a perpetual state of tension. These attacks can soon become a flashpoint that the world needs to be worried of its consequence. Neville Lazarus, Sky News, Delhi.
Let's now speak to Chitrapu Uday Bhaskar, the Director of Societies for Policy Studies. He joins us now from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us. What is the reaction there in New Delhi to the incursions overnight?
The immediate reaction is that the public anger and anguish, which has seized the country after the April 22nd terror attack, has been assuaged to a certain extent. Because when this attack took place, it was very similar to what happened on October 7th, Hamas and Israel. And therefore, the public sentiment was very intense. And Prime Minister Modi had assured the country that there would be a response. Yes, it took a certain amount of time, but this was a calibrated, measured response. And my sense just now is that the public mood is one of the sentiment having been assuaged, and the confidence and faith reposed in Prime Minister Modi have been vindicated.
Of course, there are many differences to the October the 7th attack that we could point to. One, for example, would be the very clear responsibility claimed by Hamas immediately, which is not immediately comparable here. But perhaps more pertinent would be what happened next. Are you suggesting that what will unfold from here is a lasting and ongoing war?
I'd just like to make one observation in relation to October 7. The limited point is that in both cases, innocent tourists were killed brutally. And that having taken place, I think the sentiment in India was what we have seen over the last 2 weeks. But for now, I think India has sent its own signal of resolve and restraint. And it has repeatedly made this point that our objective is to ensure that the forces that are supporting terror from across the border desist or stop from doing so. Now it is for Pakistan and what is often referred to as the deep state to really arrive at a determination about how they wish to respond. So I think we'll have to take it a day at a time.
What is your expectation from here? What is Prime Minister Modi saying as it relates to whether India is prepared to draw a line under its response thus far, and your expectation of whether Pakistan is likely to accept things as they are?
Yeah, I'd say that Prime Minister Modi has drawn a line. He has conveyed both to Pakistan and to the international community that for him, a response was warranted. It was done in a measured, calibrated manner, targeting terror assets and cadres. And now the ball really is in Pakistan's court. It is how Pakistan wishes to respond. If it were to send a message that it will distance itself from such terror activities, I think an off-ramp should be possible.
Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated, Mr. Bhaskar, the Director of the Society of Policy Studies, joining us from New Delhi there. Let's get the reaction of the government here. The Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, was with us earlier on the show.
Of course, it's always worrying. This is a long-running conflict, very sadly. Both partners, India, Pakistan, have an interest in regional stability, and we're a friend and partner to both countries. So anything we can do from the United Kingdom, in terms of dialogue, in terms of de-escalation, we stand ready and able to do so.
What might that involve? I mean, we have a relatively recent example of this in 2019. Are you hopeful? Are you confident that the worst is behind us this morning or not?
Well, you will understand that when there is action of this kind, we can anticipate it. We wouldn't have shared with us the details of the retaliatory response. I do know the Foreign Secretary's reached out to both partners, as have our American allies and other key partners, other key European allies as part of this. Sometimes what is required is a trusted channel of communication. That is for both parties to decide if that is the way forward. But they both do have that interest in de-escalation and, of course, in regional stability.
Mari's here to sum up the sense of international reaction thus far, including from the UK.
Yeah, exactly. So you heard from Jonathan Reynolds there, and he's talking about how, if the UK was needed to, they would, happily facilitate in, peacekeeping in terms of mediation or conversations with both parties. They say they're friends with both India and Pakistan, and they hope that they can find a way through this, essentially. And they also urge any British nationals or those in the region to check the government website for travel advice in terms of where is safe and where is not safe, and how far they should be away from certain borders and those kinds of things. So if anyone who's interested, make sure you go on the government website for that information. And then we've also had reaction from the US. So Donald Trump and Marco Rubio have both been talking about how they hope this can end very quickly, essentially, and that they were kind of putting in some context around the dispute that has been between India and Pakistan for years and years. And then also the UN Secretary General has also issued a statement from his spokesperson where essentially they've said that they don't want anything to escalate, that the world cannot afford a conflict between India and Pakistan, and that they want maximum military restraint from both of those countries as well. So that's a bit of a flavour of what we're getting on the international stage. I'm
going to talk a little bit more about that throughout the rest of the show. But we also, just whilst we've got Mari, to reflect on some of the other parts of the interview with Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, of course, who was on in part to talk about the new trade deal announced yesterday with India. Here's a portion of the exchange on that topic.
It's a tremendous deal for the UK. It will mean faster growth, higher wages, more jobs, more tax revenue for every bit of the UK. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. This is the best deal they've ever done with anyone in terms of the benefits we've got. Some specific things will be of interest to viewers. So India is the biggest whiskey market in the world. We're pretty good at that. Tariff is 150% at the minute. It halves immediately and then falls to 40% over time. For electric vehicles, for the higher value vehicles that we specialise in the UK, 110% tariff on electric vehicles at the minute. That will fall to 10%. Salmon and lamb is a tariff of 33%. That goes away immediately. But perhaps even more exciting than that, for a services-based economy, Indian government procurement, that's a lot of money. It's worth about £38 billion a year. We are now the only other country in the world with exclusive access to that market. So this is going to mean more jobs, more growth, higher wages. When we talk about the government's plan for change, about getting on, showing people we can make them better off, this is exactly the kind of decisive action we need.
Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, talking there this morning about the trade deal with India. I guess we didn't play there, and it's available on my Twitter feed, the sort of bigger chunk of the interview about the kind of controversial part in this, which is on this national insurance contribution, I guess, holiday for Indian workers that come in temporarily for up to 3 years. And what's really interesting about this is if it was argued very clearly as, well, look, this is a cost, it's something we had to give up, but look at what we're getting in return, then that's perhaps quite a strong argument overall. Similarly, as he was making the case for, some other countries where we have free trade deals, Canada and Australia and Japan, might have some kind of similar setup, so it's not unprecedented. But nonetheless, it is different from what we currently have with India. And in that sense, it will mean those workers will face lower taxes than British workers. And it's a hard one on that level for them to kind of dodge questions on, given that they've been hiking national insurance contributions.
Exactly, and this is the difficulty, is their argument is we've already got these kind of rules with loads of other countries, this is nothing new, and therefore there's nothing to see here. But as you rightly point out, the difficulty is you've got the juxtaposition of the increase in national insurance contributions for British businesses, while simultaneously cutting it for Indian businesses and Indian workers. And it's that clash that is the problem politically for the government. I was interviewing Matt Vickers from the opposition a few minutes ago, and his argument was that lots of, especially small businesses here in the UK who are really, really struggling with the amount of national insurance contributions that they're having to find over the past couple of months. And he essentially said they would love a 3-year holiday from national insurance contributions. Even if it was just a temporary one, it would make their lives a lot easier in very, very difficult circumstances. And it feels like, to an extent, Labour have given Reform and Tories a bit of a gift politically to, a stick to beat them with, when the timing of this announcement in relation to the tax hikes that we have seen and the tax hikes that we are potentially going to see in the budget later in the year as well, is really, really uncomfortable for Labour, I think.
So the other thing, just quickly, Mari, on this is, obviously completely put aside the other story from India today. The timing is really interesting because the local elections were just last week. Now, obviously, you announce these things when they're ready to announce, but this has taken 3 years, or at least 10 months, of the new government. So there is definitely some flexibility, give or take a few days or give or take a few weeks, as to when you announce it. And it is so interesting that it wasn't before the local elections. Presumably, they felt it's worthwhile doing as a deal overall, of course, clearly, but because of this particular issue, they probably felt, let's not announce it before the locals. Equally, they didn't decide to wait a few weeks or months to have a completely new news cycle. So they still calculate, in one sense you could say it's a brave decision if they've calculated overall this is going to be good in the medium to long term, but they are aware that in the short term this was going to be an issue for them.
Yeah, and I think what's really extraordinary is we are still in the dust cloud, as it were, of the local elections. We are still looking and feeling out that reaction from Labour MPs, the anger amongst a lot of Labour MPs who are worried about Labour losing the Red Wall, their traditional heartland, to reform. And so the timing, as you say, is fascinating because we are still talking about that and how angry people people are with the Labour Party, which is why we saw those election results, and then you add on something that is probably not going to appeal to the kinds of voters you've already lost.
Mark, great stuff as always. Thanks so much for that. Now we're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. We'll leave you as we go to break with some of the live pictures from the Vatican, of course, where the papal conclave is due to start after this service, no less. And we'll have more from both Rome and from India and Pakistan after this break.
nel cenacolo. Questo è il mio comandamento.
Welcome back to Rome, where inside the Basilica there is a Holy Mass for the cardinals before they begin their conclave later today. A great burden of responsibility on the men who have to decide who shall replace Pope Francis. Let's just have a listen for a moment.
Per i propri amici. È il messaggio dell'amore che Gesù definisce comandamento nuovo. Nuovo perché trasforma in positivo e amplia grandemente l'ammonimento dell'Antico Testamento che diceva non fare agli altri quello che non vuoi sia fatto a te. L'amore che Gesù rivela non conosce limiti e deve caratterizzare I pensieri
we will return to the Mass as it progresses. And then, of course, later today, there is the procession of the cardinals into the Sistine Chapel, where the voting will take place and the doors will close, and we won't see any of that at all. We'll see the procession into the Sistine Chapel, but not the voting itself. But that is to come later today. A little earlier, I spoke to Robert Harris, the author of the book Conclave, which was the inspiration for the film Conclave, and this is what he had to say.
When I decided to write the novel, I realised the first thing I better do is give myself a crash course in the Gospels, which I hadn't really read since childhood, and I read all 4 Gospels quickly, almost like a novel, and I was overwhelmed by the experience, actually, because they're so radical. The concept of Christ's teaching about the rich and the poor, the revolutionary doctrine, the pacifism, the welcoming of strangers, the necessity to get rid of all worldly wealth. When I compared that to the reality of the Vatican, well, it's hard not to be struck by the contrast, and in particular, in the 21st century, can it really be the case that Christ did not intend half the world's population to play a full role in spreading his word? And that impelled the nature of the novel. So yes, and I speak here as a secular person, although I'm deeply sympathetic to the Catholic faith, I don't see how this cannot be the issue facing the Church over the next few years. The Jewish faith has female rabbis, the Anglicans have female bishops. Can it really be the case that the Roman Catholics will not allow the ordination of women? Maybe they won't, but I cannot help but believe it will be a big issue.
I was struck watching the film, and no doubt this is the same in your book, which this is my confessional, which I haven't read yet, but in the end, a crucial role was played by the senior nun who came into that meeting and said, this is what happened, and that changed a lot. Was that deliberate, to give a woman who doesn't have that much power in the Catholic Church the power to do that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I sat down to write the novel and I realised I was writing about 110 elderly men. That's an odd thing to do as a novelist. Where are the women? Well, the women are there, but in a completely subservient role. They are serving the meals, cleaning the rooms, running the hostel where the cardinals live. And I felt I must give some voice to these women. And that character, Sister Agnes, who's in the novel and brilliantly played by Isabella Rossellini in the film, is the crucial character. And that's really, you know, the heart of the novel. I've been, you know, some people think, oh, you've got a sensationalist twist at the end, you know, but I didn't put it in just to be, you know, controversial. That's the essence of the book for me, is the playing out of this drama. And, you know, I'm glad that I did it.
And just finally, so what you're saying means that this matters really, in a sense, beyond the Catholic Church. What happens in the next few days matters beyond the Catholic world and in the real world as well.
Yes, it does. I mean, if you think of many of the controversial issues facing the world, to do with the role of women, the homosexual rights, and how much family rights, assisted dying, these crucial political decisions are greatly affected by the Roman Catholic Church, which has 1.4 billion followers, as many followers as President Xi of China. The Church is an immensely wealthy, powerful institution, reaches into all areas of society, whether you're Catholic or not. So this is a profoundly political moment for the world. And this process, behind the closed doors of the Sistine, with these 130 or so male cardinals, is a very political moment.
Robert Harris there with some pretty strong thoughts on the role of women in the church. You're looking at the Dean of the College of Cardinals, Giovanni Battista Re, effectively giving his speech to the cardinals, suggesting what he thinks they should do, the kind of thoughts that they should have as they make their judgment, what they should be taking into consideration. He himself cannot vote. He is too old. He's over 80. It's the under 80s who will have the responsibility of voting a little later today. Once the Mass is over, they will have a break, and then the cardinals who can vote, 133 of them, will process into the Sistine Chapel. That will then be locked. Cum clave they will be, under key. That's where conclave comes from. And they will then have a series of votes, one later today, 4 more tomorrow, and then they will continue to vote until one of the contenders gets a 2/3 majority. All that ahead of us, and we will be back with you, of course, during the day. But for now, let's go back to Wilf in London.
Mark, thanks so much for that. Looking forward to the ongoing coverage today, but also, of course, in the days ahead as we await smoke from the all-important chimney, whether it will be black smoke or white smoke. Initially, we shall see. And now, to get you up to speed again on the top story of the morning, as India fired missiles into Pakistan overnight, let's have a look at the areas where India targeted. These are areas that the Indian Armed Forces have revealed that they hit in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Now, the majority of those sites overnight hit by Indian missiles are in that cluster in the top of the map you're looking at. That's in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. The sites are, according to the Indian military, training grounds for banned terror groups. The target at the bottom of your screen now is in Punjab in Pakistan, which is home to the headquarters of the terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed. According to reports, that compound has facilities for religious indoctrination and military-style training. Well, earlier today, we heard from India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt, as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate, and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India. You would also recall that the Security Council on 25th April 2025 had issued a press statement on the Pahalgam terror attack, underlining, and I quote, the need to hold perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of this reprehensible act of terrorism accountable and bring them to justice.
Well, earlier I spoke to Mujib Mashal, South Asia Bureau Chief at the New York Times, who said it's hard to tell how Pakistan would retaliate.
The Indian government and the Indian armed forces have essentially claimed that they've achieved their objective, that they've struck, 9 locations in Pakistan. What has happened since then is a bit of a gray picture that we're trying to piece together. There have been reports of a couple aircraft being down on the Indian side of the border. Information on whose aircraft those are, how they were down, are very, very sketchy at this point. So that what those aircraft are, if they're Indian aircraft that are being down, could indicate what the next steps in this escalation could be. If Pakistan comes out and says that it struck back in the process of the Indian military action, it could get us to a place where this may have been the extent of the escalation. But at this point, it is hard to tell because Pakistan had promised that whatever action India takes, they would respond in kind. And we just don't know what the extent of the Pakistani response so far has been.
Yeah, I guess one Pakistani official had suggested they downed 5 aircraft, which was clearly a message that had reached my prior guest, Dr. Huma Bakri, a professor of international relations in Karachi. Either way, from what we do know for certain and what you kind of can piece together there in Delhi, put into context the scale of the military action we've seen over the last 12 hours relative to the last decade or so between these two countries.
Well, it feels much larger than previous military action, not just in the number of sort of locations that India targeted, but also that it targeted a couple locations in Punjab, sort of a province in mainland Pakistan. There have been Indian, retaliatory fire in parts of sort of a disputed area of Kashmir or further away from sort of central Pakistan. But the fact that they've hit, in Punjab, that is an element of how big a response this is compared to, say, 2019 or 2016, when India, after previous terror attacks, India sort of went after locations in Pakistan. So just the number of locations that India has targeted, but also the fact that they've targeted inside Punjab. But then again, the context of this recent terror attack in India needs to be taken into factor, because this was a horrific attack. All those killed were civilians. They were killed in a very gruesome manner, where they were identified for their religion and targeted for that. So there was enormous pressure on the Indian government to respond in a way that was bigger than its previous responses to attacks on its soil.
I'm interested in your take that you'll know well, being at the New York Times, in what was done in 2019 by the US to try and ease the tensions. Of course, that was under Trump's first administration, and some suggest he and Mike Pompeo, who's the Secretary of State at the time, did a lot to diffuse tensions. What did they do? What are you expecting them to do this time?
Well, there's actually an account that Mike Pompeo wrote in his book, that he was woken up in the middle of the night when the escalation happened, and he had to call both the Indian side and the Pakistani side, because both sides were telling the Americans that we think the other side is moving their nuclear weapons. So the U.S. sort of had to calm down both sides and say, listen, this is not going to go the nuclear direction. But the other factor in the 2019 escalation was that Pakistan had used an American-supplied F-16 plane to down an Indian, plane that was Russian-supplied. So the Indians were saying, Pakistanis have breached the agreement that they have with the U.S., that these weapons, these sort of planes, the F-16s, should not have been used against us. The U.S. had provided these F-16s only as for Pakistan to use, as counter-terror. So that created an awkward reality for the U.S. to get involved as well. And what the U.S. played a role in was, because the pilot of that Indian aircraft that had been shot down was captured by the Pakistanis. And sort of the accounts that I've heard from diplomats is that the U.S. tried to make sure that pilot, it was a miracle that, he was alive and he had, landed safely after his aircraft went down. But the U.S. played a role in returning that pilot to India swiftly, and that helped sort of calm down the tensions a little bit.
It was a New York Times Southeast Asia bureau chief joining us earlier in the programme. Let's talk a little bit more about domestic politics as we start to wrap up this breakfast show today. Mari's here, as you can see. And Mari, one of the stories we haven't got to, because there's been so much other breaking news, is this new poll that Sky News has in partnership with YouGov. And talk us through the headlines from that.
It's really quite striking. Now, we always caveat these polls by saying it's a poll just for now. We'll have to see if it becomes a trend. But it is incredibly striking. So take a look at these numbers. Reform, top of the polls by far on 29 points. Labour on 22 points. Conservative on 17 points, and Lib Dems on 16 points. That puts the Conservatives 1 point ahead of the Lib Dems. Labour, even then, 7 points behind Reform, and Reform really cleaning up. Now, to an extent, we would expect this after Reform did so well last week, and it gets a bit of a bounce. You get lots of media coverage, and therefore you might get more positivity because of it. But nonetheless, if you look at this in context, so The Conservatives were last polling this low in 2019 in the aftermath of the European Parliament elections. Reform have never had this point lead this high, 29 points, ever. And when they were the Brexit party, even then, the highest they got was 26 points in 2019, June 2019. So if this is at the beginning of a trend, let's see if it is, but if it is, this is getting to a point now for the Conservative Party where people are going to start talking about extinction. People are going to start talking about the Lib Dems overtaking the Conservatives, and that is incredible.
Presumably, this was, obviously it's carried out since the local elections. Yeah. I'm not sure which days exactly. And presumably it was based on questions about how you'd vote in the next general,
yes.
not local.
Exactly that, yes. So if there were an election tomorrow, how would you vote? And this is what people are saying. Now, of course, the general election is not for another 4 years, we expect, and so there's plenty of time for these parties to change things up, for the Conservatives to, recover their brand, really, and a level of trust in their votership. Same with Labour, but nonetheless, the fact that those numbers are so stark shows that people are still not happy with what the government has done.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, yesterday, clearly we focused on a lot of that first main show back from the bank holiday and the locals. In terms of whether the government needs to be doing U-turns, and there's lots of back and forth about what U-turns they may or may not be considering over the course of the last 24 hours. But what does this mean for Kemi Badenoch?
Well, there's briefings in the papers that people are starting to discuss whether it's time to change leader. The Conservative Party have got a bit of reputation for changing their leader in recent years. And so there's one camp in the party that says we can't keep changing our leaders because then we can't be taken seriously and we look like a clown show. There's another camp that's saying, actually, we can change leaders because when we changed leaders in government, it was different because it made us look messy. But when we're in opposition, we're allowed to change leaders a bit more because we're not in government, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference to the public. And so you've got these two different camps that see the reasons for and against getting rid of Kemi Badenoch. That in itself is a problem, the fact that you've got two camps arguing over whether it's the right thing or not to keep you. And the difficulty is that, yes, she was popular with your kind of Tory old school Tory voters, and that's why she won in the leadership election in herself. Tory members liked her. The difficulty is now you've got the threat of reform and Farage really nipping at your heels. Some people are asking themselves, is she up to the job, or perhaps do we need to find somebody who can really give Farage a run for his money in the way that they don't feel Kemi's doing?
Mari, as always, thanks so much. That, in fact, does it from Mari and I and the Sky News Breakfast team this morning. We're going to hand you over now to the Sky News Today team. And first, our Mark Austin in Rome.
Yes, thank you very much, Wilf. And we are rejoining the Mass that is taking place in the Basilica as a prelude to the conclave, which takes place later today. And the timings for UK time is at about 3:10 this afternoon. The Cardinals will gather in the Pauline Chapel, then process into the Sistine Chapel. They will be singing a litany, a hymn, Veni Creator, which is an invocation to the Holy Spirit and which is meant to be a guiding hand to help cardinals in the responsibility they have, which is to choose a new pope. Once in the Sistine Chapel, they will announce an oath of secrecy, and then the master of the pontifical liturgical celebrations, Diego Ravelli, will play his part, and he will announce extra omnes, everybody out, and on that moment, the doors will be closed, and it marks the start of conclave. All that we will see this afternoon. But at the moment, as I say, it is this Mass taking place in the Basilica. And I have to say, the crowds have gathered outside and is being replayed across St. Peter's Square. And it is rather beautiful. Let's just have a listen. And taking part in this service, this mass, all the cardinals. But of course, it is a limited number, 133. It would have been 135 of the cardinals, but it is 133 because 2 have pulled out with ill health. But all the cardinals taking part in the mass that we are watching now. But as I say, the conclave itself, that really effectively begins at just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon UK time. So we'll have all the coverage of that with Alistair Bruce this afternoon.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.